Hello, and welcome to the midnight stream for Distance 16, or 16 as best as I can count it at least. Hopefully, everything is coming through. I'm sure I'm going to get people complaining that I'm a boomer, but that's just typical. So I'll wait for people to ask questions and to see that I'm actually going through, and then we can answer questions. Hello, and welcome to the midnight stream for Distance 16. It just wouldn't be me if I didn't have a window open in the other browser where the audio was playing. I wonder why they do that. It's natural to want to have a second browser open with the actual YouTube location. And they don't have it so that you can turn down the volume in advance. I've always wondered about that. At any rate, I'm trying to get better at incorporating streaming every now and again into my work schedule. Perhaps do shorter streams, which for me probably will be about an hour and a half to 2 hours. But I really enjoy doing them. And I really enjoy fielding people's questions and answering off the cuff. I have a video in the pipe about democracy that's really rambling, and I think I'll get it out late this week, early next. The thing's recorded, but it's just a matter of editing the thing together. Of course, I think my videos are getting longer and longer and longer as my career as a YouTuber gets more advanced. It's sort of the nostalgia critic effect, as they say. You have a hard time being succinct. You have a hard time making shorter videos because to some degree it feels like all your really succinct thoughts have already been said. And so most of your analysis is less extemporaneous and more musings about things. You yourself are figuring things out. And so because of that, you feel like you have to give a lot of necessary caveats and do something more in depth. And of course you want to experiment with things. So there's a natural tendency to make things longer, and I think I've kind of fallen into that trap. At any rate, I've said that I'm going on hiatus in December, and I calculated that in my present rate of video making, I'll have approximately 11 more videos to make after the democracy one. So 11 more videos, going at about 1.5 videos per 2 weeks, or 3/4 of a video per week, which is my usual rate of video production. That calculates out to about 11. So I'm going to have to start figuring out exactly what I want to say before I might have to take a very long break from YouTube. And hopefully I'll be able to do streams still, and I intend to be active in the community. But I don't, after December, I don't think I can promise the rate of production that I've traditionally kept up. And I want to make it very clear to people who are funding me that, you can cancel your Subscribe Star donations. I'm expecting you to do that. I'm officially on hiatus. If I make a video, that's just icing on the cake. I think for the videos coming up, I was going to do democracy. And, it's hard because I have been really undermotivated to do things on politics. I've kind of wanted to engage with BreadTube or LeftTube, and they never show up. They never talk to me. And, in the light of the fact that I feel like their arguments are just terrible, I feel like I'm making these abstract videos debunking things like democracy and problems with communism and socialism, and there's no one on the opposite side. I'm just speaking into the ether, and that's not a lot of fun. So in light of that, I really want to make videos on culture like anime or cyberpunk. I think I probably will do anime next because it's guaranteed to be a lot of fun. I think that if nothing else, it'll be a humorous Traditionalist Codex, and they usually tend to be a little bit heavy-handed. So guys, feel free to ask me questions. We'll watch videos. Like I said, I'm here answering questions for the next more or less 2 hours. So pretty laid back as far as I'm concerned, I should say. Here's the first question that I actually saw with I guess it's a comment. So someone comments, BreadTube is really ContraPoints and the weights on her back. Well, Yeah, that's pretty true. Actually, there is this. We have to watch this video tonight. There's one serious video that someone made to me that comes from, I think, sort of a reactionary source that I need to take seriously. But we have to watch the Quentin Reviews ContraPoints video. I laughed my ass off. I laughed my ass off when I saw that. And if I watch it again, I just can't quite believe what ContraPoints has become for the left. It's frankly amazing. It's not that great of a channel. I see people asking me why the hiatus. Okay, well, that's a good question. Okay, I'll give you a hint. It's good news, and I know exactly what month it's arriving. And it's also going to essentially screw my schedule up and take my focus away from making videos. So, connect the dots, guys. I'm married. Okay. Oh, super chats already. Well, I see some. Let's ease into this a little bit, because I don't want these chats to be overly stressful. Sometimes I feel like I'm being put on the spot, but it's just relaxation. You get back from a day of work, you have dinner made, and start up the YouTube machine and see what's going on in clown world. Yeah, I see. BreadTube is people are commenting saying that BreadTube has they share a lot of the same audience. And certainly this is true for a lot of right-wing channels too. But I think BreadTube is particularly incestuous. People subscribe to BreadTube channels and never watch them. So a lot of people's sub counts are very high, but their view counts are very low. A classic example of that is Faraday Speaks, who, he made one video, and then he got an expose in CNN and the New York Times the next day, front page with his face. I mean, come on, I didn't get that when I hit 15K. I got to contact my people in the mainstream media. All right, let's kick into super chats. Dreadnought for $5. Don't you hate anime? Also, how is Trotsky a traitor? Yeah. So okay. So thank you so much for your contribution, Dreadnought. And that's two very good questions. Truth be told, guys, I don't really hate anime or really like it. I find it sociologically fascinating because at one point I was really into anime. And then returning to it, as an adult, because when you get engaged and you get out of the dating/courting period and more into the growing accustomed to your significant other period, you tend to share like your guilty pleasures. And I always thought that one of my guilty pleasures was anime. But then my then fiance asked me, and now wife asks me, well, what are some of your favorite anime that aren't Miyazaki? Because we had watched some Miyazaki movies together. That's something that anyone who hasn't seen Miyazaki, you recommend it to them. And I couldn't think of any really good ones. The only one I ended up showing her was Ghost in the Shell, and it didn't really maintain very well. It was basically like a really long extended episode of a TV series that you came in the middle of. That was the sensation of watching Ghost in the Shell. And when you compared it to other pieces of cyberpunk fiction, it really didn't hold up. And then I started sort of going back over my anime watching habits and asking myself, why is this genre good? Why was I so attached to it between the ages of 17 and 19? I think those were, 17 and 19 were more or less the period of my life where I was like really into anime. And it was a hard question to ask. And because it's a hard question, it immediately became interesting to me, which is why I think I have something to say about it. Plus, if you insult anime on Twitter, it's really funny. In some sense, it's more fun to antagonize anime fans on Twitter than it is to actually talk about anime. I tried talking to anime with Argent Templar. I don't feel like the conversation was all that interesting. It was more or less, oh, this is my favorite anime. I kind of like it for this reason, because it had this quasi-interesting plot element in it that they never really developed into a larger idea. Oh, you like that? I watched that. And then the conversation is over. It never gets any deeper than that. So I also made a tweet, and this is what Dreadnought's referring to, about the Lion King being reactionary and how Scar's death at the hands of his own henchmen, when he loses and then he insults them to Simba's face, and then he tries to rejoin up with his hyena battalions and fight back, and they heard him throw them under the bus, and they're like, screw you, and they eat him alive, which is quite fitting because the hyenas, they have enough they may be scavengers, but they have enough pride to not be cowards. They have enough pride to be who they are. And when Scar, who's a traitor, he's not a scavenger by nature. He is a noble creature who's betrayed his nature, runs them down. They realize that they're participating in something that is beneath them, even though they're beneath the lions. And they turn on him. And so it reminded me of this, and this goes directly to your question. That scene from The Lion King reminded me very much of an article that was forwarded to me by Ben Burgess. And I had read it a long time ago, but I hadn't really picked up the irony. And this was an article that Trotsky wrote. I don't remember if it was for the New Yorker or the New York Times, but it was sometime in the late 1920s after he had gotten kicked out of Russia by the Stalinists. And he starts trying to sell America on communism. He goes like, the Russians are ignorant peasants who don't have the capacity to fully implement communism because they're not good enough. And I'm thinking like, hold on a minute, Trotsky, you got a whole bunch of peasants to fight and die for you in a civil war. You killed a huge number of aristocrats in the name of the peasants. You participated in the destruction of well-off peasants in the name of the working class. Then as soon as you lose power, you turn around and go like, oh, well, fuck those guys. Those guys are shit. You know, the reason why my revolution didn't work is because my underlings failed me. They failed to live up to the revolutionary spirit. I mean, screw that. I mean, Trotsky is a snake. What a piece of shit. What piece of shit person has peasants die for him, gets to a rich country, then turns around and throws them under the bus. It's like a Scar-like move. And I half expect him, I would have liked it if Trotsky had gone back to Russia and gotten murdered by his own peasant revolutionaries, the same way Scar did in The Lion King. I think that would have been some historical irony. I guess we had to settle for the ice pick, though. So, Die Hard Doogie. Oh, hey, man, how's it going? Yeah, you wrote an article for me. We have a new website up for those articles because I lost the right to Via Obscura. Kind of got scared off by a legal challenge. I haven't really been able to show the new site yet, but it's attached to the Cana Society, and it's quite nice looking. He wrote a very good article. For $5, he asks, it's the cyberpunk that will hook them, but they will stay for the democracy bashing. Keep at it. Yeah, I guess I hope so. I'm not bashing democracy that much, guys. I'm not a monarchist. I just think that democracy is kind of a false god. It's too... It really does. The mythology of democracy is really what demarcates people who are reactionary and conservative from those who are out and out leftists. And it's the lack of questioning of democracy that really sets aside true leftists from people who either fall into the liberalist camp or some truly right-wing camp. So, yeah, I guess I haven't made a cyberpunk video yet. There's a lot I have to say about cyberpunk. I probably would organize it around... I'd probably organize it around William Gibson with some allusions to the Diamond Age, which I consider to be an interesting but thoroughly flawed work. I'd either have to decide ahead of time whether I want to talk about my favorite board game or not, because that would be a temptation. Reactionary reacts. Do not waste this title, Distributist. But anyway, thank you, Die Hard Doogie, for the contribution. Yeah, I think... Well, I mean, it's not like we really have this great democracy removal system. that's just waiting to go. That's always the problem, right? I mean, like, just on a practical level, it's not in evidence. We won't have a replace democracy with base dictator button, and the political motivations that would be necessary to install some kind of Caesarian rule are just totally unavailable at this point. I just think there's so much groundwork that hasn't been done, even to have a conversation about whether democracy is good. As a college senior, resisting progressive institutions matches my undergraduate experience well. Any advice for someone pursuing grad school next year? I spent a lot of time in grad school, probably more than I care to admit. I think grad school is more or less like undergrad. When you're in grad school, just remember that you're an adult, and don't get sucked into the illusion that you're a student. Remember at all times that you have the ability to walk away and get a job. Never feel trapped into grad school. That's what leads to a lot of miserable experiences in grad school, is that they go into it thinking that you're kind of an undergraduate and you're not kind of, as a grad student, you're an apprentice of a professor and you're a professional. You have options. You're there for training, you're there for research, and you're there sort of to take a few extra classes, but you're not an undergraduate, and don't act like one, right? Don't get sucked into that political realm. Also, don't get sucked into political debates with undergrads. Find some organization of people who are reactionary or conservative or skeptical of the progressive politic that's reigning probably on your campus, and talk to them. Talk to them, go grab a beer with them, but don't get into debates with undergraduates. Of course, I mean, if resisting progressive institutions matches your experience, I'm probably just preaching to the choir right now. But I guess my general advice for grad school is always be conscious of the fact that you're an adult, a professional, and not a student, and conduct yourself accordingly, both professionally and when you relate to other students. Don't be an elitist snob. I mean, don't do that. That's perhaps another pitfall. But don't get into this. Don't try to relive your undergraduate days again, or try to sort of like get into a lot of people who are overly studious get overly obsessed with taking classes when you really should be trying to do research and build connections. I don't know. That's my recommendation. Well, thank you for your contribution, spam account, though. I appreciate it. It's a great question. Tales of Ruin for £5. Did you hear a Moldbug was at the National Conservatism Conference? And what are your thoughts on that conference? Seems to have been polarizing. Well, I didn't actually know it existed until I heard the Tucker Carlson speech from it. But the Tucker Carlson speech seemed pretty good. It seemed more or less what needs to be said to conservatives. The sooner we can get over this stupidity that has inhabited conservatism since the 90s, and part of this sort of white pill, hey guys, we're just about to win the culture war type deal, that's sort of encouraging conservatives not to make radical jumps that are quite necessary. It's one of the reasons why I have a hard time taking in Steve Turley. If you convince yourself that you're always, a year away from winning, which is basically what evangelical Christians convinced themselves for years in the 90s and early 2000s, that they were going to win the culture war. And I talked to these people, and I seem to remember someone asking me this online, and someone was like, "Oh, why am I so skeptical of the white pill?" Well, it's because I remember talking to evangelicals when I was an atheist. And I think I was past my irritating atheist phase that occurred when I was an undergraduate in college. And the conservative Christians were so confident that they were going to win on the gay marriage issue. And I remember thinking, what world are you in? Are you watching the same television? The media is against you. That's game, set, and match. I didn't really have any of the theoretical tools to explain that. Everyone in the 90s and 2000s was myopically focused on like narrow elections. We're kind of in that end of history mindset. But even then, sort of at an instinctive level, you understood that it was an idiotic thing to believe that you were just going to win on this issue. So Callum Blake for $5 says, why is the right so culturally weak while it's been on the ascendancy in Congress, state governments, etc. for decades? That's obvious, because Congress and state governments have zero actual political power, if we're really honest with ourselves. They have power to do some things. They have power to change tax policy. They have power to modify our regulatory apparatuses. And if you're asking whether the right has been successful in momentarily scaling back taxes and regulations from 1985 to 2005, I'd say, yeah, you have some success there. But the problem is that those two branches of government really don't have power in any other way that matters. And they certainly don't have the ability to create long-term coalitions. The fact of the matter is that what forms up the democratic consensus of the future are either cultural narratives that are constructed in the universities and then distributed through the media, the entertainment centers, which also make cultural narratives, and then demographic forces. And the demographic forces, although the demographic forces of native births is marginally, and it's a healthy margin, it's marginally in favor of conservative people. The fact of the matter is that most of this nation's population growth and most of the population growth in most Western nations doesn't come from births. It comes from immigration. And the immigration comes from countries that predominantly vote to the left. And we know for a fact that when people are introduced to new environments, they naturally vote more progressive. So the progressives, in addition to controlling the narrative, know for a fact that they're going to get an undefeatable demographic majority in about 2030, which is, it's an estimate, but that's a good guess. If that was the situation, why would you ever negotiate? And also, should I mention too that while Republicans control these things like Congress and state governments, all of the unelected bureaucracies that exist everywhere throughout the myriad different positions that actually control how the government works, all those bureaucracies are like 90% progressive, liberal, at least center-left. And they have administrations that lean Democratic. They have administrators and bureaucrats that lean Democratic. Now, I talk about this with Ben Burgess on Twitter, and I really want to have him back. It's a question I ask constantly, and I never hear a good answer for it. I asked him, okay, well, you're so concerned about people being able to fire their bosses, fire their leaders. I want to fire the people in charge of NPR, that make up the board of directors for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Yes, I know it's technically private, the same way that the Federal Reserve is technically private, but I want to fire those people. Should I, as a citizen, have a right to campaign to politically fire the board of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting for rank political bias against conservative and non-progressive citizens in this country? And he's like, no, those people are honored public servants. You can't fire them for political beliefs, herder. Of course, okay, Ben, great. So I'm replacing corporate leaders that, while not directly fireable from my democratic fiat, are periodically displaced because corporations are fairly short-lived, with bureaucrats that stay in office for life. How wonderful an exchange. I mean, at this point, I work for an organization that gets most of its funding from the government. The head bureaucrat in charge of that funding has been head of that portion of the government for longer than Facebook's been around, for longer than Google's been around. It doesn't feel particularly democratic. Not that makes a hill of beans a difference. And I think you sort of see the rather cynical motivations behind all of this. But thank you, Colum, for the question. Common Pikachu, for $2 American asks, what are your economic stances? That's pretty general, man. Um, I do intend to, before the hiatus, finish a 3 or 4 part series on distributism, which I find it's kind of nice coda for a channel that's called The Distributist, which has never once made a video on distributism. I think that's a kind of a nice coda to put in the whole thing. I have certain economic principles like subsidiarity and stuff like that. But economics is very situational. For instance, marginal tax rate. What are we even talking about? Are we talking about? This is why it's too general. Maybe you can clarify in the comments. Are we talking about currency? Are we talking about tax rates? I think these things. I think economics really has to be experimented with, and it's pretty. And it's not a very good experiment when you can't get it control. But at the same time, what else are you gonna do? It's a very dark science. I guess ideally, I would like a tax policy that would force corporations to break up and distribute their jobs across a wider geographical area. However, that's going to hurt us when we come into competition with Chinese corporations that can more readily use economies of scale. This is probably the reason why we don't enact antitrust against Amazon. Not really because it isn't a monopoly, it most certainly is, but rather because we're afraid that if we do hit Amazon with a monopoly, we'll destroy their entire business model, and then whatever the Chinese alternative to Amazon is will just come in and become the de facto manager of real estate worldwide. Okay, so Modern Man for £5 says, you wondered why anime focuses on female characters so much. I think it's that post-World War II Japan places the feminine as its ontological center. Thoughts? Well, if I was Jordan Peterson, I would say that Japan always has had a female character as its mythological center. The Artematsu, the dawn goddess, is supposedly the progenitor of the emperors, who were the spiritual center of Japan. So, in that sense, I suppose you could say mythopoetically, Japan has a feminine core. Certainly, politically and ontologically, I have a hard time seeing that in Japan. I haven't really heard much about what the culture there looks like now, but in the 90s and early 2000s, it was still, comparative to any country in the West, fairly patriarchal. And not that I know that's what you mean by ontologically having a feminine center. I will say that Japanese are fascinated by feminine forms of beauty, which is what people gravitate to when they gravitate towards these anime characters. But I just don't think that men are meant to have women function so prominently as their banners, at least in this highly sexual way. I think it's fine to, hold the Virgin Mary in your heart, or have sort of like a ship that has a female name, which are the closest equivalents I can see. But the whole waifu culture it makes me think of all sorts of really. It makes me think the same thing that everyone thinks of when they hear the word waifu. I know there's explanations, I know there's excuses, but there's no way that idea rolls over in anyone who's even marginally skeptical. Anyone's mind who's marginally skeptical rolls that word over in their mind, and they can't help but think of like a fat guy like lusting after anime girl porn. That's what immediately suggests itself. I hope that answers your question. Let's see. Paul Cornelius for $5. What's the next magical word essay? Would fascism be a good magical word? Also, have you considered exploring hypocrisy generally in debate and in life? I'm taking a break from the magical. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you very much, Paul. I really appreciate it. And, hopefully, well, I won't say anything to Paul directly here because it's not appropriate. But I just want to say good luck generally. And I've kind of taken a break from the magic word series. Fascism is most certainly a magical word, but unfortunately, it's not that much of a different magical word than racism is. I mean, what does it say about fascism? It doesn't mean anything. All it means is bad person. It's got a constantly shifting definition. Progressives don't even care what it means about, but they expect everyone to politically punish people who they label as fascist. I mean, classic magic word. I don't even need to make a video on it. It easily meets the definition. It easily meets the replacement test. Classic magic word. But I mean, it's so quintessential and it's so close to the magical word racist that I think I'd just be repeating myself if I made a video on it. So I find it really hard to do that. I find it really hard to do more of the magical word series until I get more interactions with the left. Because right now I'm just sitting here feeling, kind of asking myself, well, like, what the hell am I doing? I mean, not obviously. I know what I'm doing as a cultural commentator. I can look at a piece of media and dissect it for you. I can answer questions. I can help organizing. I can think about things, but I can't engage with my obvious counterparts on the left. I can't engage with the left in real life because they'll try to destroy my life. And I can't engage with the left on the internet because they never talk to you on the internet. And so you're here just kind of, and this is a problem a lot with the right. We can't move forward politically because our positions aren't majoritarian enough, and they maybe never will be. And the left subsequently has no reason to platform us. They'd almost be stupid to, because the second they do, even, regardless of who you are, they tend to get shown up. And I know that, there are exceptions, like Vaush. And people say I'm mispronouncing his name, but I don't fucking care. The guy is... I mean, what do I want to say about Vaush? He's not very bright. He's got a spectrum disorder by his own admission, which corresponds to an intellectual disposition, an intellectual mistake, which people call autism, aka he's so focused on his own models, he never actually looks right in front of his nose and asks himself, what is he doing? And this is obvious. And of course, like many people who are very, very outspoken and have a low level of agreeableness, as someone like Edward Dutton would say, he thinks he's a crack shot at a debate. I couldn't stand it because when I was debating with him, I could never get to the issue. It was always like me dodging 3 personal attacks for every one actual question we answer. And he didn't even have any answers to the question. We got to one conclusion where he said he did not want to have police locally controlled by minority communities, which I don't know. Can an anarchist even have that position? He says that, I'm totally ready to debate right-wingers. But all that means is that the left just has someone who's so pig-headed and obtuse that they can really use him as a roadblock to cover their own asses and say, oh, look, we're actually putting something up, guys. We're putting something up. It's fine. Okay. Yeah, progressive hypocrisy is hard. It can't be just about progressive hypocrisy. Someone needs to figure out more how we actually engage them. And that's a good question. I see Thing Club in the comments saying Ben is never coming back. That's a good bet. I really want to get Ben Burgess on, but he's never going to talk to me again because he knows what questions I'm going to ask him, and I don't think he's got good answers for them. First question, Ben, are you a racist? Like friend did accuse you. Oh, you're not a racist. So what leads you to believe that you're not a racist? Do you think those criteria make you not racist? Does that apply to everybody? And then once we're in that thread, the whole progressive worldview unravels. And, by the end of that line, he'll have broken his own coalition in two. Moreover, I don't think he really has a good definition of why he thinks Jordan Peterson's a transphobe. I don't think he's got a good definition of capitalism that meets my explanation, that really answers the questions I have for it. And generally, I just don't think that it would it would go over very well. I mean, or here's another question for Ben Burgess. Okay, Ben, you're really unhappy about me somewhat implying that Marxists were in favor of equality. Well, I have a lecture from Richard Wolff, who's your go-to person, about how Marxists are in favor of equality. So, like, why don't you call that guy out? He's an academic. He's teaching, right? So, whatever. Okay. Gregor Kyokoto, for $5 Canadian, says the Cana Society. Well, I think that's a direct donation. Thank you very much. So I did cash out some some money from my Subscribestar that I needed for personal reasons. I intend to donate half of that to the Cana Society after I get my next paycheck, and I can settle some of my debts. Hopefully I'll use it as seed money. I want to try to get some local organizations started first so that we can get a speaker circuit right here in Northern California, and then see if I can't move on. It's a little bit of a scary step, but it's going to have to happen. I see people asking me, how long am I going to go on hiatus? I don't know. Probably 6-ish months, I imagine. I mean, I might make a video or a live stream in those 6 months. It just depends on my time, really. I just don't want to get, I mean, family requirements, basically, right? There are just certain family events where you have to ensure that that family event takes priority over hobbies. And you don't want to walk into that having a dual obligation. And so I'd rather officially go on hiatus and then end it early than all of a sudden have the distributist disappear and go like, oh, well, where's the distributist going? Where did Antifa get him? Did he change his opinions? Did he tap out? Is he still on our side? No, I haven't changed my opinions. I'm still committed to the ideas I preach on this channel. Antifa didn't get me. The left didn't win. I have a family obligation and it needs immediate focus, and I can't divide my attention. So I don't want my absence or my silence to be used as a demoralizing element to fellow right-wingers online. And when I see people like Endeavor and Charlemagne, I'm really encouraged by that. I think that there has been a fall off on right-wing content, and I really wish it could be shored up a little bit. I mean, Morgoth Reviews has done some stuff. I really have liked it. I think, well, I'm not one to speak about bad YouTube channel names with an unpronounceable allusion to G.K. Chesterton. It's both a cliche and a tongue twister. But yeah, I think there's some stuff here. I'm getting a lot of super chats. Oh, here's Colin Blake again, says, your thoughts on the left caths as seen on Twitter. Well, I mean, they're eventually going to have to make, don't engage them in politics. The last thing you want to do, excuse me, I'm adjusting my microphone, so if the volume kind of goes out, let's see if I can make this a little bit better. Okay, sorry about this. Okay, so hopefully that's perfectly fine. So my advice on left caths is don't engage them on issues of economics. Only ever engage them on issues of orthodoxy. If they're off the orthodoxy, then engage. But if they're like socialists, or even, God help us, communists, insofar as communism doesn't disrupt orthodoxy, just don't engage. Eventually, that community is going to get torn asunder because the requirements of being part of the left are going to make it harder and harder and harder to be part of the left if you're not totally on board with 5-year-old drag queens. And I think also once Trump gets out of office, the left cath energy is going to kind of dissipate a little bit. I don't know that for sure, but I have sort of a suspicion that a lot of this is just a distaste with Trump and a distaste with people who they feel bent the knee to Trump, even though most Catholics I know who voted for Trump voted for him just as the lesser of two evils. I mean, in that case, what can you really do, right? I mean, democracy is always the contest between two evils, and I mean, what's more evil? I mean, Hillary Clinton, she looked like she was going to start a war. She's pro baby killing. I don't know. I mean, how can you blame someone for voting against Hillary Clinton? Which is what you'd have to do, actually. Do you think reaction is the final form? Okay, so Link for $5. Thank you very much for your contribution. Do you think reaction is the final form of right-wing thought, legitimacy-wise? If not, why debate those people instead of the left-wingers? I mean, I'd have a conversation with a right winger on any given topic. I was going to have a conversation with Trudel Tom. I have had conversations with other right wingers that I've disagreed with. I don't know anybody. I mean, are we talking about like normie cons? Are we talking about like National Review type conservatives? I'll absolutely have a debate with them. But I don't really have an interest in kicking up a big amount of drama. I just don't want to start a knife fight among right-wingers. The same way I didn't really want to start a knife fight between Protestants and Catholics. I mean, I tried that. I didn't try it, but I accidentally kicked one of those knife fights off about a year and a half ago, and it wasn't fun for anybody. It caused a lot of drama. It didn't cause any productive conversations to actually occur. And what did we end up with? Nothing. We ended up with less people creating content, less people doing activism, blah. Yeah, I don't know. Something productive can come out of a conversation, but the problem is that at this point, the left has power. I know they don't have the presidency, but they will soon. And they have cultural power. And so right-wingers have to stick together, if for nothing else, for survival. Dreadnought for $5. Thank you for your contribution again. I have another beer on me. Oh, thank you very much. I actually have a whiskey and water. The wife is stuck in a foreign country, and you have to have some come down after work, right? Okay, so he says, how to avoid blackpilling. I keep almost thinking good people should just stay celibate and die off despite the parasitic evil. How would good people dying off spite evil? I guess evil will self-destroy itself. But even if evil does self-destroy it, I mean, what to whose benefit would that procure if all of the good people simply we're not in existence to come and retake what was left by the recession of evil? If nothing else, fix in your imagination eternally the moment where the evil decisions of the left eventually catch up with them, and the political dynamic turns, and it becomes less about us retreating and more about us retaking, reconquesting, a sort of cultural reconquista of the West. If that can ever be procured, that will be a moment of renaissance, I think. And I don't think it's, despite the fact that I'm black-pilled about our present moment, I don't think that's so far from what we might expect. The distributist got assimilated by the progressive Borg. No, but I never want that to be the impression. I never just want to disappear. I want to let people know ahead of time when my hiatuses are necessarily going to have to occur. Okay, so with that, let's take a look at some videos, I guess. I'm seeing some questions. Let's start some videos. We're at the 45-minute mark. We might as well start something here, or we're never going to get through anything. Okay. Well, I don't know. We have this video called The Death of Forums for the Distributist, which I should do. Maybe we should do that first and then end with some stupid video from LeftTube. Or do we want to end with the reactionary one? What do people think? How about one for the Death of Forms, a reactionary critique by Faust, and 2 for some selection from LeftTube. I don't know. That sounds like a good turnaround. Let me just see if I can mop up some of the general questions appearing in the chat right now. To clarify, why do you focus on debating leftists instead of refining right-wing thought? Because you sharpen right-wing thought by bringing it against right-wing enemies. I think I try to refine right-wing thought by sort of my standalone videos. I hope that those, for what they're worth, introduce some ideas or clarifications into right-wing thought that can be used. But the problem with debates is that they have tendency to go personal, and that's what I'm trying to avoid. Distributors, I'm interested in reconnecting with Christianity. My question is, do I connect with the Anglicanism that is more present in my family, or with Catholicism that is long lapsed? Well, I am under obligation. Now, I don't know your personal situation, and so I can't possibly answer that question from a strategic point of view. Personally, I feel like the large jump is to reconnect with Christianity first, and then figure out the denomination that calls to you second. I personally believe that you should decide on theological grounds and not on liturgical preference or by company. But some people believe that they're legitimately being spoken to by liturgy and by the testament of friends. And if that's the avenue that brings you to Christ, I can't really correct that. I tend to think that, I have no idea what your situation is. I tend to think Catholicism is more, is less degraded. So I might look in that direction for that reason as well. But I have no way of, so I think I'm seeing more 2s. I guess we'll do the leftist one first. It seems like we'll start on a silly note, and then when we break the ice a little bit, we'll do. How about we do the Quentin reviews ContraPoints? That seems like how ContraPoints can save the internet, guys. How they can save? They're gonna save the internet. They're gonna do it. Okay, guys, I'm gonna play 5 minutes of this, and you're gonna tell me if it's too loud or too soft, because I can't tell. Okay, hold on. Let's play this video and then see what happens.
It's funny to think that when I first went to VidCon years and years and years ago, I was an anti-SJW grifter living in my mother's basement, dreaming of flying off to California to go ahead and meet my fellow skeptics.
Okay, so is that louder than my voice, or the same volume as my voice? Don't worry, we'll get to one. We have more than enough time to do these both. This is just going to be fun, okay? And this is recorded, guys. I know it's late. I know I'm on West Coast time, and everyone else is. They're at midnight. They're at 1 a.m. right now, but it's my schedule. So will people tell me whether that's too loud or too soft? Okay, it's a tad too loud. I will turn down the volume. I will turn down the volume a little bit here. Okay. So one super chat says, "Not a Megon. What blog site do you recommend? You have inspired me." Well, you can always. I don't have the capacity to review essays right now. I'm not going to lie and say I do. I've got too many submissions. But if you're going to start your own blog, the best system is WordPress. If you're willing to pay money, the best situation is to buy web space and install WordPress to give yourself maximum ability to customize it. But if you just want to have the WordPress format, WordPress.com, I believe, has that functionality. So I hope that helps. It's generally agreed that the WordPress is the best system for doing blogging. But yeah, so we're in the middle of why ContraPoints will save the internet. So here we have, in rare form, the wild skeptic. This was the person who hated religion in 2008 and hated Anisa Sarkeesian in 2012. And until very recently, was an anti-SJW YouTuber who just wanted to make video game reviews. But now he's had a change of heart. He's broken the mold. He's struck out from the conformity and found his own way. I think he's going to tell us why. I love the framing of this all. He was a neckbeard YouTuber living in his mother's basement, and he still's got the neckbeard. I don't know if that tape on his glasses is supposed to be affectation or part of the character he's playing. Spoiler alert, nobody who isn't a complete idiot breaks their glasses in that way. That was a function of an era in the 80s when glasses were made out of much flimsier material and you could actually snap them in two. So I assume he's taped them to look more like the 1980s nerd archetype. But here the nerd archetype's going to tell you how he's a changed man. He's seen the light. He's had a conversion, guys. And he's going to tell us exactly what this conversion is looking like. I think I turned it down a little too much, so let me bump it up a little bit.
And if anything, meeting those people for real pushed me further away from them than anything else could. There's something about seeing a vast sea of pale, chubby YouTubers with beards born out of their lack of motivation to shave, and all of them wearing clothes which don't quite fit their bodies, which makes one question, why does my personal ideology seem to appeal almost exclusively to people who look like me, people who act like me, and most importantly, people who live like me?
Well, I know. Usually I watch these things. I watch these things for the first time when I'm doing the Dist dance. But for this one, I'm actually watching it for the second time with you guys, and it just gets me every time. Is Quentin running away from a mirror? He doesn't want to be part of this is like Groucho Marx. I'd never be part of a club who would have me as a member. I say this as sort of like, a 30-year-old boomer here. I don't expect to eventually get to a point where I'm going to get away from 30-year-old boomer millennial Catholics. There's no way I can escape that. Not to mention the greatest critique that LeftTube has is it's a little bit, dare I say, it's a little bit white, Quentin? A little bit, just a tad.
The realistic background of my beliefs was that they were born from a lack of context of the outside world. I lived in a basement, I spent all my time making slightly edgy movie reviews for YouTube, and I rarely ever talked to anyone other than myself. Going to VidCon made me look at people and say, you're real, I have to talk to you like you're real, and I have to work to understand you like you're a real person.
It's just... I don't know, guys. I don't want to be laughing at my own jokes, so I have to get my laughing done before I introduce any humor to this. And it's a good thing we started with this, because if we did something serious, I don't think I could have segued properly to Quentin here. I mean, so much of the breadtuber aesthetic is sort of this self-deprecating, oh, like, I'm a fat slob that lives in my parents' basement. Well, I mean, you can do something about that, right? You can, I mean, do you have money for rent? Do you have money for a new pair of glasses? Do you have money for a razor? I'm one to talk because I kind of keep a little bit of stubble on. I think it makes me look a little bit rugged, but I mean, I'm one to talk about being completely clean shaven. I don't even think that's the style, but I mean, the whole neck beard like Quentin has going on here, that's a choice. That's an aesthetic. But with Thought Slime too, I'm never quite sure. I mean, like, the joke is that they're pathetic pieces of shit, lazy people who don't do anything but YouTube and play video games, but they're good because they have the right political opinions. So if you're as pathetic as they are, you too can be virtuous simply by virtue of your correct political opinions. God, man, this sign me up, dude. I mean, of course, I'm sure this is the solution, right? You'll be welcomed with open arms to LeftTube. I have to admit, though, this comes off as much more genuine than Faraday Speaks. I'll say that right off the bat, but keep it going.
It made modern social issues a lot more
Whoa, costume change.
legitimate to me and made me care a lot more about the real world, and thus made all of the petty nonsense that I was seeing going on in my own community feel a lot less worthy of my time.
Is he talking about atheism? People are talking about that a lot less, and I think we'll see the reason why. But I think I interrupted Quentin right on the road to Damascus. I think he's about to get knocked off his horse by the whole visitation by the Holy Spirit appearing right upon his shoulder as we speak right now.
And it was because of VidCon last year that I met Natalie Wynn at the Cheesecake Factory, and having absolutely no idea who she was, I decided to go home and binge a bunch of her channel. And
Someone in the chat pointed out, yeah, his glasses mysteriously have become... They're cured, guys. We're witnessing a ContraPoints miracle. Saint ContraPoints has cured... He's cured his metal glasses of their 1980s tape predicament. No, those are obviously the same glasses, and I don't think they snapped in two. But I love this. I mean, like, so apparently he converted to progressivism in 2018, 2 years into the Trump administration. Like, none of these opinions, and Natalie Wynn basically just recycles points from the rest of the progressive wing. He hadn't heard any of these arguments before. I mean, what took him over to the side of good?
I think no other person has more influenced not only the sort of content I want to make, but also the person I want to strive to be.
A woman? I shouldn't joke about that. I mean, I look the other way on progressive YouTube, and more of them have transitioned, right? The number of cis breadtubers may very soon be reduced in number, so I shouldn't joke about that.
ContraPoints is the only YouTuber. All other YouTubers are canceled. As far as I'm concerned, she is the most subscribed to personality literally everywhere because no one else on the internet exists. She is our dark queen, our glorious mother and comrade. All hail ContraPoints, for she shall lead us out of darkness.
Okay, so this is the whole... And guys, this is probably a good place to break and take super chats. Guys, help me out with this, because this is the same aesthetic that I have a hard time dealing with from the progressive side. I mean, he looked into the camera and said that seriously. Now, he kind of makes a joke about it at the end, presumably to shield himself from criticism because he realizes it's ridiculous. Because if that... And I get this with Thought Slime, too. Like, every video he calls someone racist, and he makes jokes about the fact that he's going to call someone a racist. And then the last Three Arrows video, he compares his enemies to Nazis. And so what does he do? He tries to get ahead of it by like anticipating it by turning him calling people Nazis into a joke. But it's still the same formula. It's still a formula. It's still the same thing over and over and over again. You're racist. You're racist. You're racist. And the word doesn't even really mean anything. Again, would he deny? This is the same thing with Vouch, right? Oh, I'm not racist at all. Oh, but wait. Maybe genocide against indigenous people isn't all that bad if it's done for a progressive cause, isn't it? I mean, it's stuff like that, right? It's just kind of like, it's a sort of CYA stuff in humor. ContraPoints did this And now everyone is doing this. Just like ContraPoints, about in 2017, there was this, everyone on the left was just parroting tu quoque, tu quoque, tu quoque. Every time someone, ContraPoints essentially used the tu quoque fallacy, aka, but you do it too, as a sort of get out of hypocrisy free card. And then for like 6 months, every single progressive blogger, every time they were accused of hypocrisy, they got it through their minds that they could just say tu quoque, and it would absolve them of responsibility for any consistency in their own beliefs.
Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah.
So for those of you who have yet to experience the spiritual enlightenment that is a ContraPoints binge, allow me to fill you in. Natalie Wynn is a leftist content creator who discusses issues in the world and online. Now, usually when I talk about content creators I like or dislike, I look at sort of an evolution of their content from start to finish. But because some of Natalie's content is constructed to be a point of discovery and other videos are more intense and insighty, it's probably best to study her instead in the order that you would be recommended viewing her. One of the first ContraPoints videos I saw was her classic piece Incels, which analyzes the online movement of men who believe that they are celibate involuntarily and are thus to some extent oppressed.
It's funny because this is a later video. I mean, by this time, it already had been a year since I had my conversation or debate with ContraPoints, and we talked about incels. And then 1 year later, she released this video. This is a very, very late addition to the ContraPoints canon. Let me just let's take a look at the chats really quickly before we get too far ahead here. This is a good point to take a break. Only one super chat. Okay. Very quickly. Only betas have YouTube accounts 69 for $5. What do you think of progressive attempts to retcon the archetypical virtuous 19th century woman as feminist or proto-feminist? Was proto-feminism bad? You mean like the Gibson girl? I did sort of allude to this in my last video. Obviously, in BioShock Infinite, Elizabeth is portrayed as a proto-feminist. And if you look at characters like Anne Shirley from Anne of Green Gables, then they're also portrayed as proto-feminists as well. I think it's a bad fit. I think that it's the retcon hurts too much because if they include women from the 19th century as being feminist archetypes, then they run the risk of essentially opening the door for right-wing women or right-wing men who are living in that mode. The people that they retcon in have to be either rebels or people who genuinely have I'm thinking people who are just like, I don't want to say Marquis de Sade, but people who are genuinely outcasts or have some rebellion against society. The problem with the Victorian ideal woman was that she was welcome and accepted, and the ideal in a time period that was very quintessentially conservative. Anyway, let's keep on going. Oh, did I call ContraPoints her? Yeah, they, as I usually say.
The video is easily one of the best video essays of the decade, and
God.
Arguably has done a lot to make the art form feel like something that should be taken more seriously by mainstream resources. The reason that the incel video is so highly regarded and great is that she manages to cover it from two perspectives. The first is the obvious misogyny behind the movement, that it exists off of the pretense that a woman's single role in a man's life is as a sexual partner, and the active perception of various women in the movement are based entirely around if they're fuckable and why they wouldn't fuck the incels either way. But she also goes down a bit of another path, albeit with a bit more precaution, of trying to understand how so many men end up identifying with this movement. Obviously, she still demonizes those involved, because by all accounts, she definitely should. But she's...
That's what I love about Quentin. I have no doubt that this guy was an atheist in 2007, but he's got this binary thing like, who are the bad people? Who are the bad people? Oh, incels. They're the bad people? Well, then by all accounts, you should demonize people, Quentin? I mean, have you read your script? Do you have a script? Are you just ad-libbing like I am right now? I mean, that doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound right at all. But no, but we're past religion, guys. There's nothing religious about this at all. There's nothing religious about progressivism. Nothing.
Still manages to put into context how so many people end up in that position. It's a message of, hey incels, the way you are is bad, and it's mostly your fault. But just because you are where you are doesn't mean you can't change. Indeed, a lot of the video is dedicated to discussing how incel culture is based around telling men in the movement that they will never find companionship or happiness because they are too ugly for anyone to ever want to be with. Her point is, universally, these men do have the capabilities of finding what they want if they just change their personalities enough to be approachable in social groups. And the community standard of disputing this and saying that every single virgin in America has some certain quality about their physical appearance which is unchangeable and will thus make them alone forever and ever, only makes it less likely that they'll ever get around to becoming self-actualized, and thus they'll probably never pop the cherry. I promise you this entire video isn't just going to be me restating Natalie's opinions, but in a less interesting way.
Yeah, it's going to be you worshiping her. No, I brought this question. If people watch my conversation with ContraPoints, I brought up the issue of incels with ContraPoints. And the problem with this perspective is we know for a fact that on dating sites, women reject a lot more men than men reject women. And it's not simply because men send more messages out. If you randomly take a selection from a pool of a dating site and give it to women, they'll rate 80% of them below average. And hey, some of this is due to the fact that women have too high expectations. A lot of it also is that women are natural gatekeepers. They should be picky about this stuff. They're playing for keeps, guys, even if they are trad. So the stakes are lower for starting. The stakes are higher, I should say, for starting an interaction. But this completely undermines the argument. Also, ContraPoint's solution to how incels could reform their lives and become more gregarious seemed to look exactly like imitating the shitty behavior of pickup artists. And they didn't really have a good explanation of how it wasn't that.
I think it's generally important to point out how her videos are often made with deeper points that no one really asks her to include, which I think is a mark of her content which makes her a lot more interesting than other channels. Also, it's pretty important that in this part of the video that I discuss her content as much as I can, because in part 2 I'm mostly going to be talking about YouTube trends and the algorithm and stuff like that, and it might seem like I've forgotten about her for a bit. Out of all the topics,
and if I forget about ContraPoints for 1 minute, people might not think that I like ContraPoints. Did I make it clear that I like ContraPoints? Okay, let's just keep...
Topics that Natalie has covered in her series, the most well-known of these has almost certainly been her discussions of the LGBTQ community. Many of these videos just scratch the surface in a way which will likely appeal to people who don't have many resources to be told about these things openly, but she's been known for taking deep dives into the psychology of many involved with these communities. Outside of this, Natalie's content often focuses on the rise of white supremacist and general fascist culture online and in the real world. One of her characters, which she has been playing for a long time, is the Nazi, who is, well, a Nazi. The joke of her character is that despite clearly being a fascist and even dressing up like one, many of the characters on the show outright refuse to admit that she is alt-right. Where the character comes too close to home is when she will end up actually quoting modern white supremacist rhetoric word for word, petitioning for a white homeland and claiming that representation is oppression against white people, while the centrist characters refuse to decry this as Nazism because when the character is asked if she's a Nazi, she says,
No, of course not.
Through this, Natalie criticizes not just extremists, but those who stand next to them and pretend like they aren't a part of what's wrong.
I know I've mentioned that this is... They never answer the arguments. And so all you say is like, we should be able to exclude people. We should be able to exclude points of view from the conversation from virtue of the fact that we recognize them as radical points of view. And the only way we can ever introduce them into a conversation is to essentially create progressively inspired puppet shows where caricatures of these views are paraded forward and defeated, literally, not literally creating a straw man, but literally creating a false man that you can defeat for purposes of entertainment. Well, anyway, I mean, again, no one's going to answer for this, so Proceed.
Specifically, her fake show, The Freedom Report, is an overt parody of Dave Rubin's The Dave Rubin Report, which Natalie rightfully criticizes for featuring extremist talking points without having on guests who would then challenge those points, such as herself. But out of all the characters that Natalie has envisioned for her show, perhaps the most fascinating is Tabby, a representation of Natalie's issues with how the left tends to present itself.
Death to capitalism! Hail Satan!
Looks like some of that radicalism that Natalie Wynn's trying to get rid of, right, guys?
Now, I feel like I'm in a weird position with this character, where I know that she was intended to mock the public image that the left often has, and yet I unironically love everything about her. I think that in a world where so many in the trans community are victims of acts of violence in the West, there's something so cathartic about a trans woman who carries around a bat and makes Nazis shit themselves and run away.
Yeah, but they don't. No quote-unquote Nazi is afraid of a cat person with a bat. Nobody is. And this is, again, it's like a puppet show. It's like they're sort of like, it's like the left is falling back in time, becoming less and less mature. They have to have political content that looks like Saturday morning cartoons in order for them to be able to process it, because they're so ridden with anxiety they can't tackle any more challenging fare.
I know that it's also probably not a good image to outsiders, and that's the point, but I frankly don't care, and don't expect me to, because I just don't. But generally my favorite thing about...
Okay, dude. I generally wonder why this whole this cult around the ContraPoints character Tabby persists. I'm guessing that it's an interesting psychological feature, certainly. I thought something about this. It's just every person who likes ContraPoints. Oh, I like the character Tabby. This character is a psychopath, violent, totally unlikable. Doesn't change their opinions. Who knows? And is insane. And they unironically they love this person. Tabby is their spiritual animal. Spirit animal, I should say.
About the stuff that Natalie points out is when she makes content challenging basic social norms and how they prove to be problematic both personally and culturally. Beauty, another video which is considered to be a premier...
Yeah, I don't want anyone on the progressive side asking me why right-wingers are obsessed with skulls until the quote-unquote king of progressive YouTube explains why they paid $20,000 to get their skull reshaped. For what reason again?
Example of a quality video essay goes through so many elements of that topic with a fine comb that I feel like giving it just one thesis statement is selling it too short. Natalie really is an incredible talent of breaking down issues and explaining not only why they influence other things in the world, but also how they are influenced by a larger design, by something out of their hands. But I didn't generally choose to make a video like this just to talk about why I like her, but also to discuss a lot of the positive influence that she has brought forth comprehensively. So join me, ladies, gents, and non-binaries, as we discuss...
Death to capitalism and the patriarchy, smash the binary, hail Satan. Ow!
It's become quite a noticeable trend in the past year that people who are bad or on the path to being really bad have suddenly found themselves breaking free of those chains and slipping loose of the indoctrination
and becoming good. Because Lord knows political conversations are bad versus good.
Making a better path for themselves. And I've seen a lot of people like Harris and philosophy too brought up in those discussions, but it's Natalie specifically that I've seen brought up the most. For some reason, her videos are very good for helping people realize that their points of view are just flawed or very misguided, and it helps them realize that they want to change.
Notice how, this is so interesting because Natalie Wynn and myself started their YouTube channels at roughly the same time. And we didn't hear any commentary about how ContraPoints saved me from the right wing until this year, pretty much, which is 2 years in to the career of ContraPoints. So most of their career persisted, and no one talked about how watching a ContraPoints video converted them. Not at least until The Economist and the New York Times was writing up ContraPoints as the solution to YouTube's problems. And then, like clockwork, everyone starts repeating the same narrative over and over again, like their brains were formatted.
And the question to me is, why specifically does she have this effect on people while others might not? I think a big aspect of it is that her videos are just artistically brilliant and incredible to look at. There is not a single video of hers that doesn't adhere to some aesthetic and isn't absolutely breathtaking to take in.
I mean, as long as that aesthetic is neon drag, it's basically like Henry Ford. You can have the Ford Model T in any color you want as long as the color you want is black. Well, you can have ContraPoints in any aesthetic you want as long as the aesthetic is RuPaul's Drag Race. That's the only... Have we noticed any other aesthetic in these videos that hasn't been that? It's the same thing over and over again.
Arguably her best work is the projects that come across as sort of short films, because she is seriously such an incredible filmmaker.
I mean, this is the kind of person that thinks ContraPoint's constant reference to Ionesco's The Rhinoceros is deep. Something that only... I mean, it's like the level you get in freshman college where someone who's read any amount of literature and they can't reference that literature instantly thinks that the ideas being conveyed somehow are profound. All ContraPoints is just throwing sort of reference... I mean, look at this scene right here. What is this scene? It's a frame shot of ContraPoints in their kitchen with a drink and neon, because every shot is it artistic because there's neon in it?
And in a way, I think it makes a lot of sense that this aspect helps her points get across. It's always been a big trend that people who seek to regress our culture spread their beliefs through emphatic speeches and waves of anger and really nice clothing. And progressive people, meanwhile, have a much stronger grasp on the arts and spread their ideals through that means, in a way which, at the time, can get them in a lot of trouble, but generally has a more long-standing effect on popular culture.
God, a derp face. I mean, so basically the case is that arguments are... I mean, I guess this is the case of everything in ContraPoints, that the arguments themselves are useless and facile.
To purposefully misquote the scholars of our time, the fascists have the outrage. But I don't care for the outrage. What I care about is music. And the communists have the music.
I know this is probably the highlight of this video. He's so sincere. Like, first of all, where the hell does that quote come from? What communist music? The Internationale? What did I miss? It's one really like the theremin. I mean, what music? What music? The capitalists had Elvis. What did the communists have? I'm drawing a blank here. I mean, could we consider Wagner Hitlerian music? And maybe Hitler certainly did. Guy just earnestly staring into the camera. Not a thought is passing through his head. It's also strange. This is something that progressive YouTubers do. They stand so close to the camera. Like, I mean, he literally looks like you're supposed to like feel the emotion in his face. I should say, I tried to do this with one of my videos previously. It didn't do so well, where I was like having a conversation with a fictional character looking into the camera. I have to admit, I can't really do this reading off a script and staring in and going like, oh guys, feel this. Feel my sincere emotion that the communists had better music. I don't even know what the hell I'm thinking of. But the communists had better music. And that means that they had better arguments. I wish I could understand the psychology more, or maybe I shouldn't.
I know it's sort of ironic that I'm making a video about ContraPoints and I'm not bringing across any of her aesthetic or audio quality. And the difference between me and her is that she spends weeks and weeks and months working on all these videos, making sure they're all fantastic and hilarious and gorgeous to look at and factually accurate, and she spends all that time. And meanwhile, I have a day and a half until I leave for VidCon, and I really want this to be done by then. I tried to compensate for all this by making my set look like David Lynch set it up, but I didn't order enough curtains.
I'm skipping over the joke.
And has birthed mass murderer after mass murderer. I have to...
Oh yeah, this is the right wing are mass murderers. Yeah, that's why we were on the communist side, wasn't it? I mean, they didn't inspire any mass murderers. Sorry, guys, I couldn't stand for the David Lynch joke. That was just too much.
To say that I don't fully believe that I was there just by chance. Instead, I fully believe that YouTube actively promotes reactionary content which is filled with sensationalism over level-headed stuff which actually speaks the truth, entirely because the former makes them more money. Think about it.
Okay, I mean, do people think that this guy is sincere, or is the thing that's going through my mind, is this guy sincere or is he lying? Because he comes off as sort of on the borderline. I can't quite believe that this is something that he sincerely believes. But he's too well-spoken to be an incredibly stupid person, it seems. I don't know. It's touch and go.
The YouTube algorithm exists to maximize Google's profits. It promotes channels which post more often, more than those who post less, because more people go through all the videos and see all the ads, yada, yada, yada. You get the drill. We've talked about this before. But we should all stop and consider the repercussions of what that might mean in the place of discourse. A YouTuber who cares about their topic, who spends months researching it and perfecting it, and makes something actually good, can never truly compete with some talentless jackass who knows absolutely nothing about the topic he's covering and can post whenever he wants because his videos have no substance. People who actually care and are actually smart and actually put effort into their content have always had a hard time competing with channels who can just download a BuzzFeed video, put it in Premiere, edit pauses into it, dub their voiceover, claim that the video represents all of that political topic, post it the same day, and repeat that about 4 times a week.
I mean, this formula came from a certain place, Quentin, and that place was atheist skeptic YouTube. You were on board with this when it was popular. Was it such a drag then? Besides, I don't know, the implicit thing he seems to be saying is that the mere act of making good art makes you correct. Well, I don't know. I mean, this kind of makes you despair. I want to think this guy is lying. I really do.
Essentially, imagine if you lived in a world where for every topic you ever wanted to discover more about in your youth, the person who explained it to you was leafy as here, saying that the other side of the debate is just better at winning in the marketplace of ideals is inherently dishonest, because in many cases, that side is the only side that's being promoted. For the longest time, when I Googled trans, I didn't get intelligent news reports or scientific studies or perspectives of trans people or even people who knew trans people. I got a 5'2" middle-aged Lego man at some college campus going out of his way to confuse his audience into not being able to respond to his arguments, which frankly didn't make any sense.
Yeah, that's right. This whole trans thing totally makes sense, and ContraPoints demonstrates this by contradicting every single possible justification or coherent description of being trans. I just love that it's this constant butthurt about, I mean, Ben Shapiro, like I said, hasn't been a thing since 2016. Yet we're doing this constant butthurt over Ben Shapiro again and again and again. Oh, I wonder, is he going to put down Ben Shapiro's height? Oh, are we past that? I thought we were. No, he's probably going to do it, right, guys?
Why can't you identify as 60? What is the problem with you identifying as 60?
It's not the same as gender. You can't just...
You're right. Age is significantly less important than gender.
Again, this is from 2016, guys. This is 3 years old. They're still butthurt over this.
You can't magically change your gender. You can't magically change your sex. You can't magically change your age.
You can still legally change it. People recognize
You can't legally change your age, by the way.
Wow. You can't change your birthday, so you can't change your gender.
Can you change your species? I mean, weren't you a fan of Tabby the cat? Would changing your species mean you had to be treated as that species in terms of paying taxes? I mean, you don't charge tabby cats taxes, do you, Quentin? Do you? This is, and ContraPoints is so much, I mean, again, I don't know if this guy's honest, and I'm kind of getting mixed signals from this, but ContraPoints themselves is so much smarter than their fan base. They understand that you can't do this. They understand that you can't have an identity that's political in any way, that's completely 100% discretional and psychological. Because if you do that, then the government can't function on normative categories of any dimension. Anyone can immediately change their identity to conform to whatever application the government's currently privileging. If cats don't pay taxes, everyone's going to identify as a cat and put on cat ears between April 14th and April 17th. And then they're going to suddenly not identify as cats anymore. The same thing is true for military, for sports. Once we destigmatize people nominally changing their identities, they will change them. And any attempt to privilege or use the government to procure privilege is going to backfire. And ContraPoints knows that the progressives absolutely do intend to use the government to procure privilege, which means that it cannot be purely psychological. Everyone gets this, but we're going to pretend like no one's thought of this. No one has thought of this problem.
Left wing destroyed. Debating the way Ben Shapiro does is the intellectual equivalent of starting an argument with someone and then pointing a laser pointer in their face so they're too distracted to respond, and then turning to a third person and saying, "See, their argument doesn't even make sense." I mean, I don't even have to tell you that Ben Shapiro argues in bad faith, because it's his own explanation of what he tries to do.
So the only other reason that you should ever have a conversation or be friends with anyone on the left is, and not even be friends, is if you are in public in front of a large audience, and then your goal is to humiliate them as badly as possible.
Okay, so this is a video from 2014, and if you notice, Quentin is a little dishonest here. Well, not incredibly dishonest. So I actually remember this video quite well, not the least of which because, and I really don't like Ben Shapiro at all. I kind of found him interesting in 2015, but I found him just incredibly tiresome. He really hasn't had anything interesting to say in the Trump era. And the only time he's ever kind of been a thing was when in the Obama administration, we felt like, or people who were of the more conservative variety felt that if they humiliated the left enough, and the left would relent somehow, at least in terms of the college environment. But in this speech, he's essentially giving the same talk that Ian from Innuendo Studios was giving in the lecture that we reviewed about 2 Dist dances ago, where he talks about how if you're having a conversation to try to convince somebody, you have it in private. If you're having a debate in public, you're trying to win. And that means you need to debunk the other person, and you're trying to destroy them, and you don't even need the other person's input. Now, I personally believe that there's a middle ground. I've had numerous, quote, discussion, debate kind of deals where it wasn't just purely frame game, and at the same time, there was some dialectic going on, but it was public. People could see it on YouTube. And so I don't think it's nearly as stark, but this is not something the left doesn't talk about. He's cutting the part where Ben does go to the caveat: if you're having a conversation to convince somebody, have it in private. And then this is the converse example.
That is the goal of the conversation. The goal is not to convince the person. The goal is not to make friends with that person. The conversations that are going to make the most difference on campus are the ones where you're in public, in front of large groups of people, or with a camera nearby, and your goal then is to make these people look as bad as possible.
The difference between ContraPoints and Ben Shapiro is that ContraPoints argues for the sake of helping the other side and the uninformed understand the topics, and Ben Shapiro makes arguments for the sake of confusing the other side to convince the uninformed that his argument is exclusively the only one that makes sense.
Is this the same ContraPoints that said, saying I'm not a fascist is exactly what a fascist would say? Therefore, if someone says I'm not a fascist, it shouldn't count for anything. whether you call them a fascist or not. Yeah, dude, that was totally good faith. That was totally exactly what a good faith actor would do. And ContraPoints didn't have to say that. And I can't think of anything Ben Shapiro said. I mean, I'm sure, actually, I take that back. I'm pretty sure, especially when it comes to affiliations with certain countries in the Middle East, I'm sure Ben Shapiro has dropped some equivalent hypocrisy now and again. But nothing was as blaring as that one moment from ContraPoints, nor as really destructive to right-left dialogue going forward as that one moment. I notice it never really comes up in these worshipful retrospectives on ContraPoints.
That's why when someone in his own party simply asked him to explain his perspective, he threw a hissy fit, called them a liberal, and stormed out of the show.
Well, I had to say that because I'll get my popcorn for that. If Ben Shapiro throws a hissy fit, I'm there.
In the same way that a baby has a low tolerance for pain, Ben Shapiro has a low tolerance for actual discourse. And that's why the other side seems so hesitant to attack Natalie or to even mention her. There's no single-sentence witty comeback that universally destroys a ContraPoints video. There's no way to pause her or cut her up or put her out of context and misrepresent her arguments. And even if you could pull that off, it would only end with your fans actually watching her, and then they wouldn't be your fans anymore because her content is actually good.
And then Santa Claus will come and give me a present, and all the good people will get rewards, and the bad people will get punished, because we're thinking like kindergartners, which means that if somebody is right, you can't, they can't possibly be taken out of, no, dude, you can take anyone out of context. And look, there's over 100 ContraPoints response videos from the Sargon crew that literally go through ContraPoints videos and respond to it. I think I made one. If nothing else, you can take the not out of context clip where she essentially tries to make a Kafka trap out of the word fascist. Again, I mean, this is edited video. Quentin is listening to this. He's listening to himself say, if you listen to ContraPoints, you will immediately be converted to ContraPoints because ContraPoints videos are good, and I cannot conceptualize something I like not being liked by every other person that is a good person. Who thinks this way past the age of 15? It seems to... It just sort of lacks awareness of the outside world. This guy's probably over 30.
I wanted to highlight what is, in my opinion, the best example of a bad commentary channel trying to epically destroy Natalie. It's called Why ContraPoints is the New Anita Sarkeesian. Honey, it's 2019. Get a new boogeyman.
I'm gonna keep on going. Oh, conclusions.
The internet has become a dark, infected place, which has the power to both entertain and indoctrinate.
This is my documentary on the internet.
And for us to have any chance of fixing this, to have any possibility of making the internet anything more than a burning dumpster fire.
Okay, I'm listening. I want to see how do we make the internet better? Let's make our dialogue better. Let's make our discourse better. Let's do this, Quentin. What do we need to do?
There's something you have to do.
Oh, there's something I have to do. What do I do? Do I talk to people on the left? Do I give more to charity? Do I pray more? Do I just have to be a nicer person? Do I have to clean my room like Jordan Peterson says? Do I have to read more books about politics? Do I have to educate myself? Do I have to learn? Do I have to be healthy? Do I have to reform my entire existence? What do I do to fix the internet, Quentin? What do I do?
You have to subscribe to ContraPoints.
Mother... What? Okay, yeah, that's the end of the video, guys. I don't care what he says after that. Yeah.
And you can't just stop there. You have to bring Contra to your friends, your family, your enemies, everyone. Show it to your teachers, your crush, your weird uncle who makes you uncomfortable at family get-togethers. Print it on a cake. Put posters around your town. Scribble it on the side of an egg before slamming it on the head of your local fascist. Because ContraPoints has the power to save people. And if we can bring that power to the masses, then we all win.
What? I don't think I made it this far in the video when I originally watched it. What the fuck? Is ContraPoints Jesus? They have the power to save? Oh. Shout it from the mountaintops. Subscribe to I mean, this is the thing. Like, I don't know. Like, subscribe to PewDiePie was a joke. This isn't a joke. Okay, guys, let's do some super chats. We still have time to do the other video before I have to close this down. Let's do this. Let's do this. Oh, okay. 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 I'm trying to find the beginning. Sorry, guys. So we already did the one about how to avoid blackpilling. Okay, I think I did. I'll say this again for the blackpilling question. I already answered this one, but the way you avoid blackpilling is that you first of all, like the obvious, like go outside, exercise, talk to people in real life, have one or two friends that recognize Clown World for what it is. Don't surrogate friends for coworkers and family who disagree with you. Don't try to convince your parents to change their opinions. They probably are so mystified that they don't even have the tools to understand the political situation that we're in. But yeah, just interact with life is how to avoid blackpilling. But if you're in your room and you know it's nighttime, obviously first pray. Try to move to a deeper spirituality. And if you have to think of the future, think about the ideal future. We need to sort of dream more. We need to ask sort of spiritual permission to dream, to come up with an ideal version of the future that we can actually believe in. But yes, spirituality helps too. Okay, so $5 for Die Hard Doogie. Do you think there is a reason why Cyberpunk has an absence of democracy? If so, what is that reason? Yes, excellent question, Doogie. Excellent question. So the reason why Cyberpunk has an absence of democracy is that democracy is a consumer product. It is essentially reactionary and understands that democracy can be gamed and manipulated by forces outside of itself. And therefore, it understands the defects in democracy more than most fiction really does. Saying that something is democratic doesn't mean anything at the point where you're engineering people's brains. And if you have any realistic political understanding of what a sort of post-technology, post-modern future will look like, it will be made up of people who are dealing in politics at a level that's post-democratic. I remember there was this quote from the William Gibson novel Idoru, which is the Japanese word for idol, where a person is talking about celebrity culture and saying, you know, in order to make a product that's appealing to an ideal demographic, imagine the consumer of celebrity culture being something like a fat, pink, muscleless hippo who all they can do is sit on their couch, watch TV, and occasionally vote in a presidential election. And if you imagine that, you have our ideal marketing demographic. And I think it just comes from an understanding that these Enlightenment myths are indeed myths. This is one reason why I think, as much as the Zero Books crowd whines about capitalist realism, capitalist realism essentially being the state of postmodernity that we find ourselves in. And this is another thing I hate, is that contemporary left critics of society always have to confuse their criticisms of society with something that sounds like it's criticism of aesthetics, just so if they get criticized on that, then they can deflect that it's only a literary theory. They do this with postmodernism all the time too. It's a way of creating vagueness so they can never actually be put on the spot. But anyway, as much as the Zero Books and Orthodox Marxist crowd complains about capitalist realism, which is the same thing as postmodernism, essentially. It's the same late modernity that we're dealing with in reactionary circles. They don't really have the tools to take it on, because their tools are like, let's go back to this Enlightenment myth of equality and democracy and people owning the means of production, even though there's no way that the masses can own the means of production, because the masses don't have a collective mind or a collective interest. They completely ignore the postmodern problems of power, which are necessarily reasserting themselves right now. And retreating to Marx is not going to help you with this problem. It's gonna convince you that there's an easy answer behind an unimplementable political system, but it's not going to solve this problem. And for that reason, they have to essentially discount. An honest person in postmodernism has to essentially understand that democracy, while not completely meaningless, means a lot less than the people who are its propagandists say it does mean. I see I missed 2 super chats, because there's another one here before a comment that I did answer. $2 for YJHVY. What are your thoughts on interracial marriage? That's pretty simple. Be careful. The more culturally dissimilar you are from your spouse, the more problems you're going to have. And you just need to go into that with both eyes open. It's very easy in the early stages of a relationship to underestimate the conflicts that will arise naturally from having cultural differences. They don't go away because you're in love. And because people are kind of, they're inclined to, in the initial stages of the relationship, have their sort of like in love feelings cloud their vision. They don't fully take stock of the barriers that could be involved in cultural miscommunication. And they they persist for a really long time, right? They don't go away for a really long time. I think if you have a strong religious faith, oftentimes a lot of the problems that occur in culture can be overcome much more easily. They won't be entirely overcome. They'll still be there. But if you have a religious faith to fall back to, a lot of those problems are going to be overcome. So as long as you are aware of the problems, as long as also you're not in some kind of stupid romanticized version of the other person. Like, the classic example of like the romanticized, exoticized version. Like, you have this romantic image of another race, like, white women might believe that Africans are super oppressed and super masculine, which are two things that are very appealing to women in combination. And white men might believe that Asian women are super feminine and super demurring. Those romantic visions don't sustain prolonged contact with the other person as a person once the relationship gets going. And so if you build the foundation on that, you're signing up for a whole host of problems. So discard exoticized notions of the other and keep your eyes primed to the natural cultural differences that will come up, is my advice. And if you have that, then I think you have a good chance of and I really wouldn't, and I'm running a risk. I wouldn't try to do an interracial and a cross-religious relationship. If you have a common religion, I think I think you might be in a safer bet, right? But I wouldn't. I mean, unless you're really mature, that's a very tall order to take on, it seems to me. Okay, so thank you for your contribution. I hope the advice was good. For $5, only betas have YouTube accounts. Oh, I've already answered this question. I'm sorry. Yeah, I answered that in my Edwardian video. So for $5, Son of Tiamat, how's it going, man? A lot of leftist garbage was in the Saturday morning cartoons I used to watch. Yeah, sometimes I feel like a lot of these leftists, the NPC mean there is some truth to it. The Saturday morning cartoons, the more you know interventions are exactly the kind of energy I'm getting from this Quentin Reviews type stuff. $5 also from Son of Tiamat, pronoun dropping her, she, her. Shows fugly man in drag. Yeah. I don't know. I can't. For me, ContraPoints does now and always has fallen into the uncanny valley of gender, where I think if they looked less like a woman, I would actually have an easier time watching them. Right now, it's at that very moment where you feel like you're being tricked into thinking that what you're looking at is a woman, in a sense you are, because, spoiler alert, guys, sex is gender in any meaningful sense, and we'll discover this after we discover, as ContraPoints themselves has discovered in their very videos, that every other alternative explanation of gender is totally bunk and cannot sustain prolonged probing by anyone who's thinking about it. And even if we say, oh, well, just don't look at this concept and throw it in society as law, and just don't look at it, just don't think, do. Even if we do that, people like this Jennifer Yaviv person, maybe we'll talk about that later, this sociopath, possibly pervert, people like that will invade the identity of trans, and they will ruin it for everyone, and they will require that either they will completely capsize our notion of women-protected spaces, in which case that's great for us because white women will be the newest recruit to neo-reaction, or they're going to require society come up with some definition of gender that essentially excludes those people. And I don't know how they're going to do it, because then they're going to have to prima facie come up with a dividing line that will keep the creeps out, which will be very, very hard to do. Or I think it'll be hard to do. Maybe they'll find some way around it. Who knows? Are you familiar with the... So for $5, Jared Roberts asks, are you familiar with the economist Henry George? If so, do you think it is compatible with distributism or a possible political plank? If not, why? Now, I understand vaguely about Georgism, but I haven't studied it enough for me to give a worthwhile answer to that question that will not insult the intelligence of that question. So I'm going to very much thank you for your contribution, but I'm going to say this. That question was very useful to me because I think in my upcoming series on distributism, which I absolutely intend to do, I will have to include something about Georgism. So thank you for reminding me to do that. So I'll have to thank you more than I will have to give you an answer, but what can I say? I can't give a responsible answer to that question at this stage. But one will come up. Now, there's two videos I promised, one on Jordan Peterson and one on distributism. Distributism is requiring research, so it's going to probably be the last thing I do before hiatus. I will complete it before hiatus. I think it's a fitting last denouement before I have to go on break. Jordan Peterson one seems perennially, it seems never the right time, because by the time I wanted to make a video on Jordan Peterson, the left started attacking him. And then the narrative around Jordan Peterson kept on changing and kept on changing and kept on changing. I think I might have to make this broader reactionary take on the kind of person, the archetype of Jordan Peterson. I'll have to think of an interesting angle to take it on that isn't constantly being... it constantly feels like more information is available. My previous outline has to be torn up. And if I can't keep an outline on my desk that lasts for more than 2 weeks, then I can't make the video ever. Because by the time I have the idea and gestate it long enough, the situation's changed. So distributism, definitely. Jordan Peterson, probably. It's definitely not something that just leaps off my tongue the way the Bioshock Infinite video did. So for $2, Tian Xiao, can a right-wing society exist within an urban society? It can. And, the people who have done it are Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox Jews. Now, they've done it through almost borderline criminal means. They've done it through being completely poisonous to the surrounding communities, but they have managed to form a completely reactionary set-aside society inside the heart of modernity in New York and New Jersey. Yes, they've done it. Now, I think a Christian society can't be as, how should I say, as pathological, as shitty as the Orthodox Jewish community is to other people. I think it has to have a little bit more charity, but I think that in order to make a sustainable society, we have to create a reactionary shadow society that can exist inside urban areas. It can't be like, oh, gee, as society gets more urbanized, people naturally become more progressive. Because if we communicate that, then we communicate that conservatism is a naturally transitory element, and that cannot be communicated to progressives. It cannot be communicated at any stage that if they just wait long enough, they won't have to talk to reactionaries. The message has to be, you talk to reactionaries, or your alternative is to essentially deal with people that you trust less than us, aka reactionaries from other cultures, aka the fight between trans people and TERFs. Again, I think that's a conversation that progressives want to have less than they might want to have a conversation with someone like me. We cannot provide them a situation that is, we're a transient force. It has to be, we are here forever. We will never leave. You will never get your 99% progressive society. We will always be here. And how do you know we always will be here? Well, we'll always be here because we are right inside your progressive societies. We are right inside your Berkeleys. We are right inside your New Yorks, having our own little society inside your society, and we're not going anywhere. If that's communicated, we can bring the progressives to the table. They will have a conversation if they perceive that to be the case. But if the power asymmetry is only on their side, the only thing you're going to get is these kind of big conversations, like in Quit-In reviews, where they, or in like ContraPoints, where they bring up a big reactionary and they scapegoat him and they put all the sins on the community on that fake racist and they beat the shit out of him. And people like Quentin can get hard imagining Tabby the cat beating up a neo-Nazi, which, if it's ever happened, was probably a pretty weird situation. Would have been a really, really weak neo-Nazi. Not that people should be directly protesting or doing anything that puts them in a violent interaction with the left. That doesn't work. But that scenario essentially is living rent-free inside progressive's mind, if it's ever existed once in reality. Okay, so that's a very good question. For $5 Australian, Aris, you mentioned Spengler before, briefly in regards to historiography, but what are your thoughts on this Prussian socialism and the coming Caesarism? I don't know about Prussian socialism. I haven't finished Spengler. And guys, I just, there's so much stuff I have to read. And if I'm going to read up on distributism, I can't finish all these books. But just my instinct is that we're not going to get a Caesarism. I think I think we're done with Caesarism. I think that Caesarism and this kind of like despotism to hold back the night deal, I think that died with Oswald Mosley, and I think Adolf Hitler killed that. I think that died off with the insanity of the early 20th century right wing. I think we missed the boat to that, and we're straight on to total collapse. And if we're lucky, we need to find the Merovingians, not the Caesars. The Merovingians will be the path forward, if we're borrowing a Spenglerian concept. By the way, the Merovingians were the near-barbarian tribe of Franks that were the first converts to Christianity, the most notable being Clovis, who was pretty much a savage whose wife converted him to Christianity, and briefly carried forth, more or less accidentally, he carried forth Catholicism to most of the Frankish tribes. And it was seen by Spengler as being a period of where sort of civilization, Roman civilization, was reborn in the fires of barbarism. And I think that something like that is much more likely than a period of Caesarism. For $10, Never Alone Forever. Watching you watch this, I understand why you attack the left wing so. However, leftism is highly contextual. Have not right-wingers fought each other for eons? Never forget Engelbert Dollfuss. Well, good lord, I've certainly forgotten Engelbert Dollfuss if I ever knew him to begin with. Someone on the chat want to tell me who that is? I don't think I didn't watch this. I didn't watch this because the left fights with each other. I watched this because the guy was an idiot. Or, if he's not an idiot, he's just patently dishonest. I just watched it for the lulz, basically. I think I don't know. I am getting kind of bored of the NPC meme being validated. There's nothing really more to say about it. We can move on to more challenging fare. I want to get one of these people on. Not that I think Quentin Reviews would ever go into a conversation with someone from the right. That's just, it's not going to happen. You're only going to get the CYA autistic roadblocks that are people like Vaush and Destiny. They're the only people that will engage with the right. So for $5, Stars Over Stalingrad, Jesse Lee Peterson was right. Quentin is literally calling for an evangelical leftism. Yeah, it's bizarre, right? The neck-bearded atheists have become the cringe evangelicals of 2000. I don't even think they haven't even become the cringe evangelical Christians of 2005. What they've become is like the atheist stereotype of the evangelical Christian circa 2005, never questioning any of their presuppositions, thinking that all good people instantly convert the second they see a quality version of your arguments being put forward by an entertainment medium, confusing their own emotions with some kind of compelling logical case, mistaking their ideology for a Manichaean battle between good and evil, and not being aware of their own cringe-inducing call for evangelical conversion being the one thing we need to do to fix the world. I guess this is the difference, obviously, is that he seems to be imitating a parody of the evangelical Christian, because I don't think, when Christians say there's one thing we can do is spread the love of Christ, that actually kind of makes sense, because Christ is the way, the truth, and the light, unironically, for Christians. He actually does contain, he is God. He is the Godhead. He is part of the answer, the great I am. That makes sense, unironically. Here, it seems like he's literally trying to become a Poe. He's literally trying to become something that's indistinguishable from the parody of itself. I guess that's what everyone on LeftTube is trying to become. I just think that the answer to this is sincerity, guys. I probably should start doing these things with my real face. I put in enough videos. Just at that point, It just doesn't feel like, you're done with cooking, drop your suitcase. You immediately become more self-conscious and it becomes less relaxing. For $5, have you tried bringing, for Paul Cornelius, have you tried bringing normie conservatives onto your channel? I've been reading George Will's book. So weak, but the National Review crowd must have uses. Well, I mean, my experience with normie conservatives is I bring them on, and most of them just instantly agree with me, or they instantly just kind of tap. They instantly kind of like, oh, well, I'm sure things will work out. History will correct itself. Or they concede the point, they register my objection, and then they kind of reset as soon as they get a certain distance from our conversation. And sort of they forget it, or the programming takes effect. That's my two experiences with them. So what happens is you tend to get live streams that look a little bit like the live stream I had when I had Ray on, where it's like you expect like this big confrontation and a lot of back and forth and a lot of either interesting ideas that come out of the dialectic or, if nothing else, drama. And you really don't get that. You get like concessions and then people going like, well, we'll just have to see. And that's boring. It's boring YouTube. Nothing is really discovered. It's no secret that normie right-wingers don't have any answers to these objections. The only answer they could have is to win, which they're not. So, anyway, let's do a few more super chats. I don't think there's any more super chats. We're kind of coming to the end of this. Let's look at the other video here, the video I was going to do. And then we can finish off super chats that accumulate during this time. The death of forums for the Distributist. I promised I'd do this response, so let's get to it.
Hello, listener. I wanted to make a video to start sort of a dialogue or perhaps present some ideas to a YouTuber called the Distributist. He's a Catholic, a traditionalist, but he also incorporates a number of neo-reactionary ideas, and he's, I don't know, of people on YouTube, he's one of the more interesting, people engaging with more somewhat deeper philosophical ideas rather than live streaming and laughing at SAWs and so on. I like him, I like Apollonian Germ, a handful of others, but the Distributor specifically is focused on trying to restore traditional Catholicism. And I do mean traditional Catholicism. I've never heard him explicitly talk about Vatican II or anything, but I get the general impression that he would be more aligned with the Sedevacantist and SSPX sort of people, although he does not reject the Pope.
Yeah, I'm not a Sedevacantist. I'm not even a Latin Mass Catholic. I'm just a Catholic. I think Vatican II spawned a huge number of narrative problems for the religion that we are still trying to overcome, and that's a problem. Now, I deeply respect this guy Faust, and I'm sure he's going to have a lot of interesting opinions, but I do recognize that this and a lot of other people who talk in this way, and this really sort of comes from sort of the black-pilled European MGTOW and Nickland reactionary school. I find it interesting and challenging, but I try to ask myself, what is this? What can we take from this that isn't simply a counsel of despair? But I'll let this guy go on and make the point.
Than the modern Catholic Church. But his whole project is kind of to try and bring Western society back into the fold of the Church, to explain why Christian values, and in his case specifically Catholic values, are a good way to guide society. And to that end, he does incorporate some more modern views on things, specifically from Mencius Moldbug, And he did engage with proprietarians at one point, although I think he did it a slight bit of a disservice by dismissing its deeper ideas because of their surface agitation for violence, which I do admit Kurt Doolittle is a little bit of a spastic on that field.
I mean, perhaps. I don't think the project of proprietarianism, aka like expanding the linguistic framework of Enlightenment libertarian, is necessarily a bad one. But I think that, insofar as the Christian narrative is tired, oh my God, with all of the problems the Christian narrative has, it makes the libertarian narrative look geriatric in comparison. Nothing seems more tired than trying to argue progressivism into a situation where you convince them that they have to respect your property rights. What's going to come of that?
At any rate, the idea I want to present to counter this is I'm a follower of Spengler, and I believe in the death of forms and the life cycle of all things, because in nature everything has a life cycle, from animals and humans to ideas to civilizations to even the geography of the continents, Pangea, continental drift, and so on. Everything shifts and changes, is born and dies. Nothing is permanent. Nothing lasts forever. But
perhaps that's a big assumption.
In every change,
I don't say that because I think that there's some human element to society that lasts forever. But I think that in order to be, we will need to qualify that, right? It certainly can't be true in the abstract unless the universe is entirely chaotic, that everything is transient. But I think what Faust means here is that human and temporal forms are entirely transient, which I would agree with.
In every development, traces of what has come before are manifest. When the continents diverge, they manifest shapes and the craters and impacts of meteors and so on that have always been there. When species evolve, they maintain DNA traces from what came before them. They have genetic similarities, they have vestigial organs, these sorts of things. Everything is built upon what came before, and I think that's no different from ideas. Spengler calls this when a civilization dies, it can either disappear completely or it can undergo pseudomorphosis and transform and incorporate some of its ideas into what it later becomes. So,
very true. I think he's going to give the very example that I would cite here, so I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to let the video play.
The example to give about Christianity is what was Christianity originally? Well, it was a progressivist rabbi, Jesus.
Not a good characterization of Jesus at all. If Jesus were a progressive of his era, then he would have been trying to convince the Jews to give up on their traditions and become Romanized, when in reality what Jesus was preaching was a strengthening of some rules in the Torah, a focusing on prayer, a focusing on ethics, and then a de-emphasis on other forms of the religion. Even if we take Jesus at face value without any of the assertions of divinity or the sacraments, in his pure teachings about Judaism, he was certainly not progressive. There were Romanizers of the Jewish faith, and Jesus was certainly not qualified among them.
Trying to incorporate some of the Greek ideals into the at that time ruling Orthodox Judaism in Palestine. There had been a clash of conflicts within Jewish civilization since the time of Alexander about the pro-Greek faction and the traditionalist Orthodox Jewish faction. And Jesus was kind of a representative of this somewhat pro-Greek faction, incorporating certain Greek ideas. And after Jesus was crucified, one of the first discussions among the apostles was whether Christianity was meant merely for Jews or for the entire world. and what ideas to incorporate and so on. For example, one of the discussions was about circumcision, which the pro-Greek faction was opposed to circumcision, and the pro-Jewish faction was.
I mean, I think this is more or less just details. I'm missing the point that Faust is trying to build up to, but this certainly was a large controversy in the early church, and it shows you how much the church changed from what it talked about pre the collapse of Rome and what it would talk about after. And I think this might kind of lead us to what I consider to be perhaps like the obvious answer to Faust's question, but I don't want to anticipate that. So let's just keep on going forward.
In favor of circumcision. So what does Christianity do? It travels through, it spreads throughout the world, through the underclasses and so on, and it first goes toward the Roman Empire. So what happens, it starts incorporating a lot of ideas that were popular at the time, such as Stoicism, such as Neoplatonism, and it really rather transforms the originally sort of Old Testament Jewish ideas into far more European forms, dropping quite a lot of its more Eastern mysticism and so on by the wayside and incorporating these Greek ideas.
I'm going to quibble here. Christianity was more mystical in a lot of ways than the Orthodox Second Temple Judaism, and certainly the Rabbinical Judaism that were its immediate rivals in, well, I guess the Rabbinical Judaism wouldn't be around until the fall of the Temple, but still, I don't think that characterization is entirely accurate, but I think I see where he's going.
Greek ideas. And then when Christianity becomes dominant and it starts evangelizing towards the north, it starts encountering the Germanic tribes and so on, and it incorporates into itself the festivals and some of the gods become names of saints and so on. So it incorporates this Germanic civilization as well. So what is Christianity? It's basically European forms with a slightly Jewish influence. It's Judaism, it's Greek.
So, sure, the liturgical forms change, but the question now is whether the essence and the logos of the religion changed. Is the Christianity we practice now the same as was practiced by the apostles? Which I think is a very fundamental question that everyone who's considering Christianity needs to ask themselves. This was really the only historical question that I asked myself. Okay, I shouldn't say that. I did struggle a little bit with the resurrection, but my main historical quibble with Christianity was whether the Christianity of the apostles was the Christianity of the current church. Whether Christ was more legend than he was actually as he appeared in the gospel. And I had to come to the conclusion that while the form changed, the essence of the teaching persisted. And I think that's very, very important.
Philosophy and its Germanic forms. And I identify with Christianity because it is, I think, the manifestation of European thinking for the last 1500 years. I know a lot of people say that Christianity isn't really European, but I disagree because maybe its origins aren't necessarily in Europe, but the people who shaped it were Europeans, and the theology of Christianity was shaped by European thinking and by European tradition and built upon older European ideals. And my interest in Christianity, which I identify myself as Christian, specifically Calvinist, because I have this sort of Germanic, pagan attitude towards respecting the faith of your ancestors, and the Dutch were Calvinists for 5 centuries or more, so I kind of find it undesirable to break with the tradition of that what came before. So it's kind of an ancestor worship kind of thing for me to embrace Calvinism, because Calvinism is that which most manifests the Dutch form of Christianity, because I think every nation, every people has a sort of inherent character that shapes their ideas, and therefore when Protestantism came up and freed peoples from this universal.
Okay, I mean, we're rambling about Calvinism. I mean, I I'm good friend. Well, I'm not good friends with Paul Vanderklay, but I deeply respect Paul Vanderklay and a lot of other people who are Calvinists. I have huge problems with the Calvinist theology. I think it's ground zero for the progressive transformation of our society away from Christianity. But I don't want to pick a fight with Calvinists. So I'm just kind of like, I know this isn't the point. He doesn't want me to refute Calvinism. So let's just keep on going here.
Catholic Church, the specific forms of Protestantism that were adopted in each nation were influenced by the national character of these people, which is why you get a really, really hard-line Puritan Lutheranism, for example, in Germany. And you get a somewhat more easygoing, but very...
Oh, hey, it looks like Catholic Wench is in the chat. Maybe she can clear up the mystery about why I'm going to go on hiatus in December, if she wants to.
Inward-looking Calvinism in the Dutch, which is very sort of productive and verzeild, which I'm not sure how to translate that, but it's that's my thing with Christianity. Is I think Christianity was transformed by European ideas. Christianity did not transform European man's way of thinking. So I think it's kind of...
Yeah, so I just don't buy this for a second. I don't... No. This is European early 20th century bullshit. Christianity absolutely transformed Europe. And this is the thing. And maybe this is going to get spicier than anyone anticipated, because I'm going to drop some opinions about race here that I probably shouldn't talk about this. But this is, people always ask, they think I'm evading this, and some spicy questions about race I actually am evading. But some of them are just the concept I have about race is, I think, is just more mature than most of these alt-right people. Christianity has totally and utterly changed the European man. I think it's clear from records of pre-Christian tribes. We can see what they valued. We can see what people valued after Christianity came to their country. And a lot of what this early 20th century racial science was trying to do, it was trying to reassure European civilization post-Darwin that they could safely discard Christianity and maintain their core European element. And as we see from the current degenerate state of European society, the current state of American society, that ain't true. Once you discard Christianity, we don't maintain any of the essential qualities you see in terms of chivalry, in terms of ethics, in terms of what it even feels to be a North American and a European. Some of that's demographic, but most of it's just straight up cultural, guys. Most of it's the fact that most of it is being driven by people who are, conspiracy theories aside about certain ethnic groups, most of it's being driven by indigenous European peoples. So, and that's not even to say that it's entirely 100% cultural. I don't know that for a fact, but if you go to people, if you dig deeply into even people who put more emphasis on race, like Edward Dutton and Michael Woodsley and the Alternative Hypothesis, they will say that it was the ethical system that was introduced to European society post the fall of the Roman Empire that slowly conformed Europeans, both culturally, genetically, and epigenetically, to slowly become the peoples that we now know in the 19th century and early 20th century. People have a highly mutable quality in their societies, and forces like Christianity absolutely influence that. And I think that really this idea that there is some essential European nature that molded Christianity more than Christianity molded the essential European nature, that's a myth of the early 20th century. And I think that we have good evidence to support that.
A bad idea to dismiss 1500 to 2000 years of European thinking, because some people say that it comes from outside of Europe.
Oh, and by the way, that is not to say that if you introduce Christianity to Africans, they will become Europeans. I think if you introduce Christianity to Africans, they will become a more ordered and a more holy version of their own civilization. Christianity won't turn black into white or orange into yellow. Christianity is not designed to melt everything down into one common culture. All it does is make that culture more itself and more ordered and more holy. But that being said, much of what people lament dying in the West is not so much the individual flavor of our food or the individual qualities of our culture, although I think that's worth preserving insofar as it can, because like all human forms, it's fundamentally mutable, right? It's not, like this guy said, it's not going to change. It's not going to be eternalized. It can't be eternal. But most people lament when they lament us becoming clown world is not an ordered culture that was the 19th century becoming a new ordered culture that is some new society. What they're lamenting is clown world, which is chaos. They're lamenting the fact that order is being replaced by chaos. People who are pretending to be women so they can live out sexual fantasies, like this Yaniv person, or Desmond is amazing, preteen drag queens, is not one cultural order being replaced by another. It's order being replaced by chaos. And that is what people are actually lamenting. Now, I don't say that people shouldn't preserve their own particularities. I think it's part of the design plan for the European to be more European and the African to be more African. But I don't think that's what's actually happening in our society. I think it's the worst elements of Africa that are replacing a 19th century culture, and it's the worst elements of European culture that are replacing a formerly Christian culture. I'm not lamenting that a great, brave, bold Wakandan civilization with its own customs is colonizing European degeneracy, and it's pushing out the native culture because it's just so ordered and well formed, and oh man, I wish we could do that. That's not the objection. It's much more fundamental than that. And if there's anything that could be devoutly wished going forward insofar as Catholicism is concerned, it's getting a cardinal like Sarah to become pope. He might actually save European civilization in a way. He might actually re-Christianize it, which would be the height of historical irony as far as I'm concerned, but it would be a sort of godly irony, if you get my meaning.
And the most interesting things about Christian thought are, of course, the theology surrounding it, such as the ideas about free will, about just war, about what are rights, about, for example, humanism was a challenge towards the traditional conception of God at the center of the universe, placing man at the center of the universe. And there's a huge interesting discussion about that. So
and that challenge was what made the essentialization of European man as racial necessary in the early 20th century. If you took anyone before Spencer or anyone before Herbert Spencer or Galton, the Darwinists of the late 19th century, and asked them, would you be surprised if European culture died away 50 years after everyone stopped being Christian? People would be like, oh yeah, of course. Once the religion goes, the society will go too. It's only in our current state that it's even odd that we're in clown world now, given the inputs we've put into our own society.
Christian theology is fascinating and interesting philosophy. But it was all transformative of previous ideas. And the thing I have now with people who want to try and restore traditionalist Christianity, whether that's Catholicism or Protestantism or Orthodoxy, I think the issue there is that it has reached the end of its lifespan. Nietzsche said this already in the 1880s. God is dead, and God is dead because we killed him, because our society and our ways of thinking have been transformed in such a way that we can no longer, as a mass society, move ourselves towards true belief, because science and rationalism destroyed it.
Maybe. It's a proposition. It's a theory. Maybe religion's a futile endeavor for man in postmodernity. Demographically, that's not the case. Demographically, religion is going. Right now, Islam is growing the fastest. And right now, post-religious man has not found out a way to replicate himself. So, has religion died, or has humanity died? That's the first question. The second, more pressing question that Nietzsche brings up is God, or more specifically, is Christianity eternal as it claims to be? I don't know the answer. I have my theories that it is eternal. But if it isn't eternal, then to hell with it. In the words of Flannery O'Connor, if the sacrament is not what it claims to be, if Christ is not the eternal man, then don't be Christian. It only makes sense. Christianity only makes sense as a belief system if it is eternal. If it's a transient form, then maybe we should just be European. Or maybe we should just be deists. If you believe in an eternal God that's not necessarily connected with a specific incarnation or a specific witness. Maybe there's something more we could be. Maybe we could be some kind of Zoroastrians or something. I don't know. I don't know the answers to all these theological questions. I can tell you what I believe and what I think is well evidenced. I'm fairly confident that there is some universal order in the universe that can properly be described as God. That I'm confident of. I don't know for a fact, I don't know for a certainty that Jesus was who he claimed to be. I feel it's evidenced. I feel it's evidence enough that a commitment can be made. But the commitment is that it is an eternal form, or it is that it is an eternal essence, that it is, I guess, eternal form by definition is logos, right? It's no longer a transient human form. It is an eternal nature of the universe. And unless it's that, then it's not what it claims to be.
Now, my main thing is trying to find a way to try and combine spirituality and science. Because what sociology shows us is that quite a lot of these things, like faith and religion, are simply necessary for human societies to function and for individuals to live happy lives. That's the big conclusion of Emil Durkheim's work. And that's the conclusion if you read any sociological work on religion at all, is that these sorts of things are mass phenomena that cannot be eradicated from man. There's a reason that every society has had a religion. Because man is fundamentally spiritual, and liberals and leftists and so on, they have this idea that, oh no, if you just, we can eradicate religion through rationalism. But really what you do is you just substitute it with other dogmas and other articles of faith, because that is simply how man thinks on a mass level.
Well put. And descriptively, and I think, was it William James? Yeah, that's the James brother I'm thinking of. William James was the varieties of religious experience, probably was the first person to genuinely attempt to create a phenomenology of religion in an honest way. No, I mean, there are other ones, obviously, from the earlier Enlightenment, but I think that one was a really formative work. I mean, it can be done. We can create a phenomenology of religion, and in some sense, Jordan Peterson, with his maps of meaning, has done that as well. But I don't think you're going to get an answer to these questions about the eternalness of forms just by creating a phenomenology. I mean, like, for instance, science is a human form. It, by its nature, is transient, as is all human knowledge. We hope that it's pointing to an eternal logos that stands behind the universe, if in nothing else, in some kind of grand unified physical or statistical or mathematical theory that's consistent in between observers, that's intersubjectively verified once we stand outside even human existence. But we don't know that for sure. It's a presupposition.
On an individual level, some people are capable of rational thought, even then not all of them. But anyway, so religion is important and has to be restored. And I think Christianity is a good point to restore it to, because it actually has a philosophy, a way of thinking, it has forms, it has art, and it has a huge tradition that we can appeal to, and it is in many ways still, I think, quite European. People who, for example, want to revive German paganism.
So I'm going to stop here. Like, I don't know if he's aware he's he's doing this. But it's not like a flaw of the video or anything. But it is, he's sort of communicating like a presupposition here that I think he needs to be a little bit more aware of. He's coming into this saying, like, I want to preserve Europeanness through this Spenglerian change. I mean, isn't Europeanness a form? It most certainly is. It is. Europeanness is a form. Not only that, Europeanness is a form that doesn't even claim to be eternal. Unlike Christianity, which might be an eternal form, I know definitively that Europeanness is a transient form, not least of which because I've literally observed the form of Europeanness radically and diametrically change in the very period he's referencing here, in the period between the fall of the Roman Empire and the emergence of medieval civilization in 1000 AD. That's a 500-year span. Europeanness completely flopped over. There was a demographic change. People say that demographics have been very stable, and indeed they have after 800 AD, but between 500 and 800 AD, there were massive population changes. Most people in the British Isle have like 10% plus Scandinavian DNA because of the Viking rapes and invasions. I don't need to mention the Norman invasions didn't really change the DNA very much, but the Saxon invasions massively did. These were massive upheavals in what it meant to be European. It does not mean the same thing as it meant prior to this period. So it's a transient form. So are you asking me whether a possibly eternal form can save a transient form? Well, if there's any hope that a transient form has, it is in refuge of an eternal form. I think it's definitively true that Christianity is more itself. It's more like the thing that was before the fall of the Roman Empire than Europeanness was. Yet somehow we seem to be trying to find a refuge for a form that must necessarily die.
I understand the romanticism of that, but there's nothing there really to go back to. There are only dead forms. There are the runes and there are the stories, but even those stories weren't written by actual pagans. They were written by Christian monks. So what you have is you have archaeological finds, you have some art, you have some rune stones, but not much more than that. You don't even know the philosophy of these people, or how they thought, or what they wrote down. They didn't really write much. Only the runestones. And there's no mass of people who believe in it. Now, Greek paganism you might have an easier time trying to revive, because quite a lot of Greek classical history was, of course, recorded. And although there's not really a theology of Greek paganism, if you read the plays of Aeschylus, and you read Plato, and you read Heraclitus, you read the Stoics, there's a vast body of work, basically from the Greeks, from which you could infer their worldview and their way of thinking.
Yeah, I mean, but then the question kind of begs itself: what worldview possesses the Greek view of morality in the modern world? Really, only Christianity, in terms of large belief systems. I've never met anyone who is a genuine Platonist and stayed a Platonist. I've known many people who've transitioned from Platonism to Christianity. Leo Labresco, myself in a lot of ways.
And you could reconstitute a sort of philosophy based on that. But for Germanic paganism, not really. You can only look at what they historically did and some of the forms and art they had. So there's not really a living thing there. Christianity still has something of a living thing, but it's very diminished. You could say Christianity is in its old age, it is dying. But it has a bigger body of work to call upon and to take up and transform, because that's what happened with the Greek thing, right?
I mean, how are we so confident that Christianity is dying? Europeanness is certainly dying. Christianity, certainly demographically, Christianity isn't dying. It's growing slower than Islam is, but it's growing. It's even growing as a share of the world population.
The Greek thing was so influential on European societies because there was so much to call upon. And Christianity has quite a lot to call upon as well. But it does need to be transformed. That's the thing with the death of forms, the death of ideas. I think fundamentally that Christianity such as it is not going to be restored. Because if you look historically, very, very few times does anything ever reverse its decline. Does ever anything changed its downward slope course?
What are you talking about? Christianity was a Roman religion before the Merovingians, Faust. It was a dying Roman religion. It was going to be supplanted by the native religions or by Arianism, which was more favored by the barbarian hordes when they invaded Eastern Europe. Christianity was a dying religion in the face of Islam. It reversed its course. Christianity has survived one cataclysmic change of civilizations, one, which is more than the record of anything we have currently. Judaism has survived about three. Well, two. The Babylonian exile and the fall of the Second Temple. Two civilizational cataclysms, and it survived. So we're saying that of all the modern religions, Christianity is the only one that is eternally going to die, because Islam and Judaism certainly are going to keep on living. But we're convinced Christianity is going to die. I have less of a factual contention with Faust than just I just want to kind of interrogate some of his presuppositions, I suppose. I think he has it wrong way around.
There have, for example, been practically no reversals of the liberal progress since the French Revolution. With here and there a short, brief, last-ditch effort attempt to reverse it, but not really fundamentally. And therefore, I think that this Western liberal world order will accelerate until it falls off a cliff, and then things have to be rebuilt again.
Yeah, we're on the same page with that. And but the question is, what's going down with it? Europe might be going down with it, and I guess. And once more, I'm going to show my hands here about my feelings about the race question, whatever that means. I think that this concept of Europeanness and the white race, these are the dying forms. And it doesn't mean that I think that what remains of Europeanness or whiteness is going to be erased or destroyed, but it's going to be reformed in a very, very radical way, so that what appears on the other side is going to look very, very different. What most likely is going to come out of this cultural cataclysm is a variety of hopefully Christian practicing races, different races that all derive in different capacities from the original Western civilization, and each claim heritage from that civilization in the way that almost every nation in Europe claimed to be descended from Rome, hence the Tsar, Caesar, hence Kaiser, which is actually a more accurate Latin pronunciation, apparently, than Caesar itself in the English version. But if I was to make a dispassionate guess about what reality is, that is it. And so I feel really like I feel like I have a responsibility to carry the civilization forward, to carry the broad strokes of the peoples forward, and to certainly preserve the faith. But I don't think that, really, the present organization of the nation states, this ridiculous idea of the purity thing, it's not going to survive. And so I just don't think that it's worth expending effort, making sure that the particular forms are going to carry forward in the exact way that they exist now. It doesn't seem to be worth the political effort to do that. I don't know. But I will say this. Treachery against an existing form, even a form that's dying or dead, is just so odious that I almost want to ally myself with the people obsessed with race, just to spite the people who are dancing on the grave of a dying or dead form. In some sense, the treachery of these kind of anti-whites is so odious that I kind of want to be anti-white. But I'll let Faust continue. I don't even know what his position on this is. I just divulged that because I assumed that was his position.
And when you start rebuilding, then you can call upon Christianity. But the problem is you cannot call it then Christianity, and you cannot use all of its forms and art, because basically quite a lot of European peoples have been vaccinated against Christianity.
That's true. Europeans, but you gotta unvaccinate yourself, because there's this, you're gonna vaccinate yourself. You've essentially said you vaccinated yourself against something you need to live. You need religion to live, or you're gonna die. It's gonna be Christianity, it's gonna be Islam, or it's gonna be something. It's gonna be this sex cult that we've got going on right now. Pick your poison, gentlemen. So we've got to find some way to unfuck the situation, because Christianity isn't going anywhere. European man is.
They would accept many of the same ideas if you used other words than holiness and sainthood and God. If you used other words but expressed the same ideas, you could have a conversation with these people. But if you use those terms, they react like that, like they are vaccinated against those terms. They have a sort of Pavlovian reaction. The same thing happens with other things. For example, if you talk about race, people have a Pavlovian reaction if you use the word race. But if you talk about certain differences in other contexts, people don't have that Pavlovian reaction, because every culture sort of has a set of moral values, and the moral values of certain words. And the distributors call these magic words, but it's not quite the same thing. They're more like symbologism. Those words are like a symbol for a network of ideas, and that network of ideas is moral and wrong. But if you express the idea slightly differently, you can have a real conversation with people.
I mean, I don't, it's not, magic words aren't my idea. I'm taking it. I just think that we needed to have a new word for it, so I invented magic. Well, I didn't quite invent it, but I introduced it as such. But he's describing what I would call a magical word, a word that creates an emotional reaction or social consequence, even though you could translate it. You essentially could translate its meaning and not get that reaction, because the definition of it is vague. And it's just what causes the social consequence is the symbol, and not what the symbol is actually attached to. That's what creates the magic word, and that's what he's talking about here. And that's how you control people's thoughts. You get them. People react negatively to the symbol of Christianity. You can literally describe. I have had this in before. You can talk to Europeans about ideas about what's right, what's wrong, how we need to create a force for anti-degeneracy, and the ancient traditions, the view of meaning, the view of good, the unification of good and meaning, its communication through witness. They agree. The second you get to a form they recognize as religious or Christian, immediately shut down. I don't know what to say, guys. Like, you want to be connected to your ancestors, but you want to separate yourself from the linguistic framework that unifies yourself with the ancestors. Humans communicate through logos. If you've created a barrier where you're inoculated against your grandfather's logos, you are forever going to be dislocated from your own past. There's just no getting around that. You're not even meaningfully reacting against the... You're not even going like, well, I disagree with the ideas of my grandfather. What you're saying is, I have an emotional reaction against the symbols of my grandfather, which, that's ridiculous. Get over it. The symbols themselves are how people emotionally carry forward their identities. That's logos. That's literally what logos mean. Well, it means language in a sense, but that's essentially what's happening. You can't reject the logos of the religion and somehow be unified to its essence. You can't do that without divorcing your own humanity. And the logos is Jesus. I know that sounds sort of brutally, sort of it creates a dissonance in the secular mind. I can't embrace Jesus because that's what dumb people do. But that's the logos of your ancestors. Christ is the logos of your ancestors. And if you reject the logos, all you have is disembodied platitudes that exist totally outside the context of your ancestors, totally outside the context of anything that you can relate to in a real way, of anything that you can imagine actually touching and feeling. All you have is just like these Platonic forms and half-digested Greek religion that you can't really associate with. Or what you have is you have the scraps of early 20th century Christian civilization, existentialism, modernism, impressionism, the stuff that secular society produced before it completely unmoored itself from its own spirituality and morals and fell into this sex-obsessed communist morass which it currently is in. I'm sorry, it sounds brutal, it sounds stupid, it sounds like and this is a very well thought out video, I really appreciate it, but there's no way around this. You either have to embrace the logos of your ancestors, or you're going to be in disembodied brain. And in disembodied brain is not going to survive intergenerationally, because disembodied brains don't have cultural or physical gonads.
And the problem there is that if you want to get people to embrace a sort of traditionalist society with traditional values, which basically would look something like Christianity, have sort of the same values as Christianity, it would have logos. You have to drop some of the forms that Christianity has, because otherwise people are not able to embrace it in mass because they have been so immunized against it. It's the same thing with the pagans, right? There's no living mass of people willing to embrace those ideas. There's a handful of people with fringe.
Well, that's different. I mean, paganism doesn't have any essence. What you're saying is that Christianity has a problem with the current form it's in. Well, that's fine. The temporal forms will dissolve as they are currently dissolving, and eventually, through death, Western man will be in some form, albeit much more hobbled than he is right now, to re-embrace Christianity. He will be humiliated until he can. But there's no way around this eye of the needle. You have to either go down and enter through the door of Christianity because you've been so utterly humiliated that's the only thing left. And I am one to say it because pride's a problem for me. God knows. But there's no way. We can discard the temporal forms, but we can't discard the eternal forms. You can't discard logos, or you're just not going to have anything left. You're back to Platonic God belief that has no substance to it.
With some ideas about it and so on, but there's no living mass of people, and you do need a living mass of people to get anywhere. And you need to have people who are willing to fight and die for it.
Absolutely agree.
If you don't have people willing to fight and die for an idea is basically worthless. It is an intellectual curiosity. Liberals are very much willing to, maybe not die, but they're certainly willing to try and kill you for their ideas if you step too much out of line.
Yeah, but all that is to say is they're cowards. Tabby the cat girl will hit you with a bat for being a fascist, but she's not going to take a bat hit from a fascist, not willingly. And the only type of military ethics is the willingness to die, because the willingness to kill in isolation from a willingness to die, that's just cowardice. I guess it's fanaticism, in a sense. But fanaticism is weak in the face of real bravery. And I am a coward, admittedly. But I can recognize what cowardice is. I can recognize that the cowardice in myself is actually cowardice. You know, I don't consider myself a brave man, but I recognize what small elements are bravery and what is cowardice.
And certainly punish you by other means if they can do it through the rule of law, like trying to legitimize their punishment of your intellectual defection. They'll do it that way. So that's kind of what I would be interested in talking. Well, I wouldn't really want to do a stream or anything with Traditionalist, but I'd like to hear his thoughts on this idea that everything has a lifespan, everything dies, everything is transformed and takes into it that what came before. And therefore, restoring Christianity to its pure form, such as we have it, like biblical literacy, with the exact church, the exact liturgy, the exact same rituals, the exact same art forms, such as saints and so on, and the cross, might not be possible. But you could take a lot of it and carry it forward. Some of the architectural forms, certainly a lot of the ideas, certainly a lot of the philosophy. Maybe not the rituals, though, just not the Mass, for example, because people would recognize that too much as Christianity.
Okay, well, I'm going to let this go and then answer it, because I think he's coming to his main point.
And maybe if someone has a different idea on how to restore Christianity, I wonder how that would be possible, because restoration, I think, is very, very difficult, almost never done historically, neither of civilizations, neither of peoples, neither of ideas. Ideas don't really stay dead, they transform, and peoples are never really eradicated, because even if they are conquered, their DNA gets carried onward into a different group, although quite transformed, sometimes for the worse. For example, the Turks who conquered Anatolia, they are called Turks, but if you look at their DNA, the vast majority of it is DNA of the peoples who came before, who lived in Anatolia, the Greeks and the Kurds and so on. But it's still transformed in such a way that it is unrecognizable, and the civilization has no connection anymore with the peoples that came before it. And the Turkish example is an extreme one, where a small genetic and cultural influence pushes it completely towards another civilization and takes it completely away from what came before. Pretty much.
Which will be Europe's fate.
Because the Ottomans never really,
if it cannot accept this,
incorporated much in the way of Greek philosophy. And the Christianity example is, for example, a different example, is the opposite, where these ideas come in, they are transformed completely, they incorporate many more ideas until it becomes really much more a European thing than a Middle Eastern thing.
We say this as we are literally looking at a Byzantine chapel in Asia,
where the original Old Testament ideas really kind of fall by the wayside. And that's another thing about Protestantism, where some people say, oh, Protestantism is much more biblically literal, and is therefore it abandons a lot of the traditions to which Catholics actually do have. And in terms of forms, I think that's true. In terms of forms, Catholicism has more of what preceded it, of the Greek and German art and festivals and forms, but not so much in terms of ideas, because I think Protestantism allowed for a expression of the underlying way people think of each group. Germanic Protestantism is much more in line with how Germans behave anyway. And same goes for, I think, Protestantism in Scandinavia. It adapts to the people there. And there's a reason I think Protestantism gets adopted in certain countries and doesn't in others. Because it's a philosophy that's slightly more, it's less hierarchical, although it does of course have hierarchy. It's
okay, I'm really losing this thread. He had a good ending point, and now we're rambling.
Slightly more individualistic. It can be in many ways much more Puritan, much more hardline, where Catholics are a little bit more laid back and easygoing. So in Southern Europe, where the people are a little more easygoing and accept authority more and so on, you've got a much more hierarchical structure of church. But really, people aren't so hardline about this whole dogmatism or Puritanism. In Northern Europe, of course, you get huge wars of religion, you get purgings of heretics back and forth, and in the 19th century in America, you get these extremely Puritan Christian forms trying to enforce biblical morality and so on. And I think that has to do with the character of the people who adopt that religion. Anyway, the point of this video is to try and discuss, to get a discussion going about.
Okay, I think I got the message. I just don't want to hear more about. Okay, so long story short, there I agree with everything about the death of forms. Human forms are naturally transient. They will always die. Europeans, Western civilization is one of those forms. It may be dying. It may be in the process of transforming into 1, 2, 3, 4, or several other new forms. And those forms will be guided forth in history, hopefully, in a godly fashion. But if there are eternal forms, may I ask one thing? Are there eternal forms? Are there eternal functions? Are there eternal ways we can discern good and evil in this real world politically? Because if there aren't, then who cares? Everything is change, and we can just be Buddhists. We can just detach ourselves and resign ourselves to the change. But if there are eternal forms, if there is holiness that can be realized politically, then our concern is to discover those eternal threads going throughout human history and make sure that they persist. And Christianity has a potential. It might be one of those forms. I think it is. And that's, I think the whole, this is like a picture that's correct, but it's turned upside down. It's turned upside down and sort of inverted. And I want to turn it right side up. The question is not, is Christianity, how are we going to change Christianity so Europeans will accept it? It's how are Europeans going to change so they can accept something, they can carry them forward into the future. I hope that something is Christianity because I believe it's true. And that's the choice, because the mass is not going to change. If the mass disappears, then Christianity dies. That is the eternal form of the sacrament that is Jesus. That is a central tenet of the Gospels. That is the form that must persist. And European man will continue to suffer. He will continue to get smaller until he is small enough to enter into the Mass, until he's humiliated enough to enter into a form that is eternal. But it's not going anywhere, and Europe is. And if Europe wants to save itself, it's going to have to get on board with that. But it's not God's responsibility to change himself into a form that will accomplish that. It's European man's responsibility to change himself into a form that can actually survive. And that's just reality. Europeans in particular have gotten themselves accustomed to this idea that somehow their civilization is the fact of life and reality can be formed around its necessary continued survival. This is how Europeans think they're going to change the demographics of their continent and still somehow preserve some aspect of their Europeanness. They're not. It's going to change. And they're in for some hard truths coming down the line, guys. Okay, so how about this? I'm going to take about 20 minutes more to answer super chats. Oh, wow, I've gone way over on the time. Okay, so 20 minutes to answer super chats. Yeah, I hope this has answered Faust's question well enough. But I think it's an accurate picture that's just hung upside down, wrong side up. Okay, let's refresh the super chat page. I have to work tomorrow. Luckily, I need very little sleep. Oh, here we go. Super chats. I'm not seeing that. This is the problem with doing live streams. You get hungry. And I'm on a fast diet, so I can't eat anything that has calories after 8. I'll just drink a lot of water. Okay, so for $5, Irish Cream says, "Hello, my friend. Please have a nice night." Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I appreciate everyone who super chatted me, and I'm going to have to set up a rule once my finances stabilize about how much I give back into the community from what's dedicated. I feel half is a good amount now because a lot of the money came in before I had a commitment to the Canaan Society. So we'll see how this goes. New Zealand $10, Kiewicz, thoughts on the female intersexual competition playing out on the left, Pelosi versus the Squad. I think Pelosi versus the Squad has less to do with intersexual anything, intersexual competition. If you were to say like intersexual competition, I would assume competitions over top husbands, as you can kind of see in some circles, especially in the African American community, like where high earning mates are in high demand and in low supply, or even medium earning mates for that matter. I think Pelosi versus the Squad is more about the progressive stack. I think white progressive women they've kind of coasted, especially in California, under the assumption that even though they understood that they weren't on top of the stack, those who were above them were never situated in positions of power where they could actually kind of push them down. And Pelosi is realizing that the Democratic Party is not her party. The Squad is going to be put ahead of her. And she's going to have to get used to this reality. I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I hope Nancy Pelosi eats dirt, because she has brought this on herself. And Dianne Feinstein brought this on herself. Dianne Feinstein deserves to have her position questioned. She deserves to be primaried. She has created the situation we're in. She's created the progressive stack, and she deserves to have the consequences of it. I mean, I don't think that history is necessarily just, but there are moments of justice in history. And having Pelosi and Feinstein brought down by their interactions with these people is justice. I believe so. I don't want to be the person that pronounces justice on history, but I'm not pronouncing it, I'm recognizing it. When ideas have natural consequences like this, I think it's just recognized, not really pronounced. Will Carter for $2, thank you very much. Just a pure contribution. Well, thank you very much for that. $10 for from Windowlick. Congratulations on the news of your arrival coming soon. Mr. Mystery. I wonder what that arrival is. Although I think Catholic Wench was kind of dropping the ball in the chat there. Yeah, it's probably not a secret. Before your hiatus, would it be possible to start a new Discord server for the Cana Society? I already have a Discord server for the Cana Society. Is that not in the description? Maybe it's not. I think what we should do is create like a universally circulated Discord discussion server. But the problem is that, if I create a universally circulated Discord server that I hand out the link to everyone, then trolls are going to come into it. They're going to create alt-right memes, and then see, the thing is that we had Clear Trads as kind of like an entryway community towards the guarded server. But the problem was that Clear Trads got shut down, but they banned for the crimes of people on Clear Trads. They not only shut down Clear Trads, they banned my entire Discord account, which means that the old Cana Society Discord was essentially a headless account. It was an ownerless server, which meant that it was a sitting duck. Eventually, the garbage collection would have collected it because no one owned it. It means no one had ultimate privileges over it, which was, again, I created a new one with a new account. But since then, I'm like, okay, well, as soon as Discord figures out who owns this account, they're going to shut that down. And so I've been much less invested in it. I don't know, guys. I know people switch to Telegraph, but Telegraph doesn't really seem to have a voice community. So I don't know. Someone's going to have to tell me. I'll fix, if there's a discrete problem, like I'll give you the link to the new Discord server for Cana Society. I will. If you DM me on Twitter or something, I will. I'll make the link as widely available as I can without getting inundated with trolls. But I feel like I can't use my time for Discord. It's not worth it. It's not worth it when someone else's speech can get the whole thing shut down. In spite of our best efforts, we knew this was coming. We knew a purge was coming. We were deleting things that we thought were controversial. We still got taken down. Because Discord was, they still saw it. They were we deleted it, but they were under no illusions that this was going on. Paul Cornelius for $5. Thanks so much, Paul. Some dissident rightists, UPJW, recommend we make replacement culture of books, music, TV. This seems easier said than done. Suggestions on how? Well, that's good. I've been considering using my hiatus to do some writing. To be quite honest, Paul. I mean, okay, so there's two ways to do this. The first way to create music, books, TV is to create collectives that make it. Like wikis. And we have a Canis Society wiki, which it's very small, but I'm quite proud of what it is currently. And it could be a repository for stuff. And that would be a piece of culture that we could create. There also is the possibility for creating community projects. I mentioned this on a stream with Fritz Imperial, but what if we had sort of like a pulp version of SCP, a sort of collective fiction writing project? This requires a very, very large community, but it's just a thought. Then it gets to TV, movies. Give me $1 million because those things take money. Books and music. Well, books and music are better, but the problem with that is books and music are not collective products. They're products of authors that dedicate themselves to a single idea. They come out of authors. So short of someone committing to generating that, it's very, very hard. Now, when I go on hiatus, I suspect that despite the fact that I probably will have no creative time whatsoever, maybe I could carve out an hour here and there where I might have a creative urge. And I would have some quiet time just in the spaces in between to kind of work on some of that stuff. So maybe I could work on the idea I'm toying with. Right now, I feel like my project is to create the 13 videos between now and October that will kind of create a nice little coda for the first season of the Distributist. And so that's more my priority. But yeah, there's no way around being an author of books and music and stuff like that. You can't create art by committee. You could create something like SVCP or Wikipedia by committee and by collective action. So how about we go on for 10 more minutes? Or 10 or 15 more minutes of like the last super chat, hopefully like in 5 or 10, just so I don't accidentally miss it when the stream ends. Of course, if I do, I'll read it out in the next Dist ends. Usually I'm pretty good at doing that. I see reactionary expat in the chat. I think we were gonna have a conversation with these. I'm just busy. Like I need, even this stream, like I need to get to bed so I can wake up tomorrow at, I need to wake up in 6 hours to go to work. So, I'm doing this burning the midnight oil quite literally at this stage when I wasn't really planning to. I thoroughly enjoy these things. But I need some time to kind of wind down after coming off of a distance like this. I don't see any questions or any super chats, guys. I guess I can just talk about plans. I think the general, maybe I said this at the beginning of the stream, but I think the general plan is going to be democracy and an appendix of some political ideas about ontology that I'm going to publish this week-ish since I'm traveling. Then next week, I'll probably start on the anime thing because it's just fun. And then I might do a response to ContraPoints on the cult of ContraPoints. Then with any luck, I'll do the Jordan Peterson / archetype of Jordan Peterson. And in late summer, in August, I can start the Distributism series. And then between that and a scattering of videos here and there, that will pretty much carry me over to the hiatus period. I've heard some really good ideas. Cyberpunk is a great idea. I've wanted to do a Trad Codex series on that. I totally don't. I mean, I don't feel it necessary to do any more Magical Word series videos. I almost feel that insofar as I have 13 more videos and every video in one direction is a video I don't make in another, I almost feel that the Magical Odyssey thing was a nice little coda on the first. I don't doubt I'll return to Magical Words after the hiatus, but insofar as that series has a codex, a coda, aka an ending, I feel that is a pretty good coda for the series. I mean, I can't say what am I going to say about fascism. It's exactly like racism. It's a magic word. That is the thing. Jared Roberts, Costella House and Vox Day for Alt Media for $2. Yeah, those are both publishers that do a great job. Also, Russell Newquest, he's a publisher that does Catholic science fiction. There are Catholic science fiction authors. Oh, here's an idea. Here's something that we barely ever talk about. There are Catholic authors. Such as, what is that? I'm sorry. Like Gene Wolfe, for instance. Yeah. So there are science fiction stories like Gene Wolfe and other people who are really based. I mean, Dune's one that's the property's already owned on that one, right? But there's all of these science fiction things like Robert Howard. That's also an IP. Why, instead of whining about the thoroughly boring world of Star Wars being ever more continuously invaded by mindless progressives, why don't we try to expand these worlds and give them a little bit of character? Why not role-playing and card games and collective fiction products and fan fiction products that take place inside the world of Gene Wolfe? Now, obviously, Gene Wolfe, it has this problem where it's too philosophical, and the second you do like a fanfic inside of it, you feel like you're kind of doing down the original series. I think Dune's always had this problem. Dune has had the problem that it's a little bit too philosophical. So for instance, when I was in high school, Brian Herbert, Frank Herbert's son, teamed up with another science fiction author who I think wrote science fiction for Star Wars books. And they wrote this series of utterly banal, boring, forgettable sequels to Dune. First in a prequel series. And I think I got bored of the sequel series. And they did like a series on the Butlerian Jihad, which for those who are not familiar with Dune, is sort of the backdrop for the universe where humanity rose up against the idea of technology and sort of put it in its place. So technology would only advance in a way where it was parallel and not competing with humanity. And in this sense, and essentially they ruined it. They wrote a Butlerian Jihad that was less inspired by Ted Kaczynski and more inspired by the Terminator movies. And it was just an insult. And I think, the question is, how do you write parallel plots that don't just sort of undermine the philosophy of the original work? I think much more successful, if it hadn't been IP, would have been Warhammer 40K, which seems to have extracted a lot of the darkness and the gothicness of Dune. But since it's in a sort of different world, people can do stupid stories in it, and they don't feel like they're betraying the original source material. So maybe if there was, I guess, in Dune and in, maybe people could take sort of gothic grimdark fantasy of the Gene Wolfe, Frank Herbert, 40K variety, and create universes where people wouldn't feel like they were doing down the original thing if they wanted to do just a stupid pulp story in it. So that's sort of an idea. But I don't think that pulp stuff is by itself bad or stuff. Anyway. Yeah, I don't see any other questions, really. Okay, I see someone saying that they have problems with the private video / Discord. I'll repost it on the Subscribestar for people who are subscribed. I'll just do that. I need to remind myself. I post it periodically, and I'll post periodically again, so I'm going to have to track back through all the various posts. Anyway, I should have it as like an automatic message. Anyway, I should be going to bed. I should drink some water because, yeah. Anyway, guys, you've been a great audience. Thank you for bearing with me, rambling, and reacting to these videos. I've had a great time. I hope you've enjoyed some of this rambling, and have a wonderful rest of the week, and I'll see you coming up then. I'll see you coming up after I release the democracy video. Cheers and blessings.